Chapter 459. When Mrs. Su was finally annoyed and the smile on her face gradually became less patient, Jean Wan said, "Madam, MN Group has invested in 2 Hope primary schools in the province. If you have time tomorrow, may I accompany you to see the children in the Hope primary schools?" Mrs. Su immediately looked at Jean Wan in surprise. "Does your company also do charity?" Jean Wan smiled. "Although MN Group, as you said, dominates all major industries, not everyone can do charity. MN Group has always insisted on doing charity and has sponsored many children abroad. In the past 2 years, many Hope primary schools have been built in China under the name of MN Group, but not all of them are in High City. We have a special charity working group, which is distributed all over the country." The smile in Mrs. Su's eyes disappeared, and she nodded with a smile. "Not bad, not bad." Seeing that the topic was diverted again, Ji Mengran sneered and said, "Since MN Group even has the money to do charity, I don't think it is short of investment." Jean Wan glanced back at her. "Meng Ran, based on the fact that you can buy a watch worth more than 1,000,000 yuan and the clothes you're wearing add up to more than 1,000,000 yuan, your studio doesn't lack money to the extent you say. We're in the same boat." Although MN Group had the advantage, Jean Wan deliberately said, "We're in the same boat." The derogatory meaning in her words was self-evident. Mrs. Su didn't look at Ji Mengran again but looked at Jean Wan with great interest. "It's good to do charity, but as Mengran said, your company is not short of money. Why do you need our investment?" Jean Wan glanced at the stack of documents in Mrs. Su's hand, which were all the documents Ji Mengran had taken out while chatting with her just now. The documents were full of all kinds of prospects for the future of the studio and various ambitions written by talented subordinates, which made people feel that this studio might indeed have a good development and was worth investing in. But Mrs. Su just skimmed through it casually and was no longer interested in continuing to read it. Jean Wan didn't take out any documents, but they happened to walk into a place in the mall that was contracted by several electronic products under the name of MN Group. Seeing that all the staff of MN Group were working very hard, and there were many customers in the electronic products and the stalls of major brands, it could be seen that everything under the name of MN Group was full of business opportunities. There was indeed no shortage of money or business to do. Seeing this scene, Mrs. Su had an idea in her heart, and then turned to look at Jean Wan. Jean Wan also turned to look at Mrs. Su. There was no desire in her eyes for this investment but a polite smile. "The more money, the better. Only with more investment can we achieve a win-win situation. I don't need to say more about MN Group's current strength. You can see it, and you know better than me where to invest your money. After all, as a professional investment businessman, you should have a long-term view. I won't influence your judgment, Mrs. Su. It's true that I don't need this money, but many domestic enterprises are not very stable now, and not everyone can achieve a win-win situation, but MN Group can certainly do it." Mrs. Su smiled and didn't speak anymore, and Jean Wan didn't say more. They were both businessmen, and Mrs. Su certainly knew who could bring more profits to her. Unconvinced, Ji Mengran took Mrs. Su's hand and asked her if she was tired. She wanted to take Mrs. Su to the Western restaurant downstairs to sit for a while, but Mrs. Su refused. It was already noon. When they arrived at the food court in the mall, Jean Wan saw a vegetarian restaurant and asked softly, "How about a vegetarian restaurant?" Mrs. Su nodded. "Okay." Ji Mengran, after entering the restaurant and ordering a few simple dishes, Mrs. Su ignored Ji Mengran but kept discussing with Jean Wan the changes in the business in recent years and some things about MN Group. Obviously, she was inclined to support MN Group. Ji Mengran wanted to speak several times but couldn't get a word in, so she could only sit aside and stare at them. Before the dishes were served, Jean Wan took the lemonade handed to her by the waiter and said with a smile, "By the way, speaking of gifts, in fact, I also prepared 2 gifts for Mrs. Sue. Oh. You also have gifts. Mrs. Sue looked at Jean Wan with a smile. Hearing that Jean Wan also had gifts, Ji Mengran rolled her eyes. Just now, she looked at her with a contemptuous expression, and now she was trying to please Mrs. Sue with gifts. Jean Wan took out a few letters that looked old and dirty from her bag and put them in front of Mrs. Sue. In addition to donating to the construction of many Hope primary schools, MN Group also donates to some children from poor families every month. These are the thank you letters sent by those children not long ago. They were written by those children themselves. Their families are very poor, and they don't have good envelopes and stationery. The letters are also written in pencil, and the handwriting is a little blurred, but every word is full of gratitude and hope. I have treasured them since I received them. With that, Jean Wan took out a string of ordinary-looking Buddha beads from her bag and put it next to the envelope. This string of Buddha beads is made of very ordinary peach wood. I didn't hire a professional master to carve scriptures on it. Although it's a very ordinary and rough peach wood Buddha bead, this peach tree is a very old tree in the back mountain of Nanfan Temple in Sea City. This peach wood is at least a few hundred years old, if not over 1,000 years old. Furthermore, it has always been under the influence of incense in the back mountain of Nanfan Temple, so it's very spiritual. Not long ago, because the temple was renovated, some of the trees in the back mountain had to be dealt with. I asked for a few pieces of peach wood and polished them into Buddha beads. Seeing the 2 gifts that Jean Wan took out, Ji Mengran suspected that she was joking. She gave these shabby things to Mrs. Sue, who was worth tens of billions of yuan. Was she crazy? However, when Mrs. Sue saw the 2 things that Jean Wan took out, her eyes were shining. She raised her eyes, looked at Jean Wan seriously, and smiled. "CEOG, thank you. I'll accept these 2 gifts. I like them very much." Ji Mengran was stunned and looked incredulously at the happy smile on Mrs. Sue's face. Jean Wan calmly curved her lips into an elegant smile. "As long as you like it." Chapter 460. In the afternoon, Mrs. Sue said goodbye to them with a smile, satisfied. Ji Mengran stood on the commercial street, watching as Jean Wan turned around and glanced at her coldly. She felt a wave of bad luck in her heart and was so angry that her face paled. Before Mrs. Sue left, she didn't say a word to Ji Mengran. Instead, she had been holding Jean Wan's hand and chatting with her. From what they talked about, it could be concluded that Mrs. Sue was going to invest in MN Group. "Jean Wan, where did you learn to charm people? How could Mrs. Sue be attracted by you in just a few words?" Ji Mengran asked angrily. Jean Wan walked to the side of the road and waited, saying coldly, "In fact, at first, Mrs. Sue wanted to help you set up your studio. Can't you see that she had a good impression of you when you were a child? And MN Group is really not short of money, so she wanted to help you." Ji Mengran was stunned for a moment. Mrs. Sue's attitude towards her at first was quite good, but later, you can only blame yourself. You know how important this investment is to you, but you don't know how to do your homework. You don't even know what Mrs. Sue likes to do in private, Jean Wan said with a smile. Jean Wan smiled. She used to invest with her husband, but her husband was killed in a major case that shocked the antique industry a few years ago, so Mrs. Sue is particularly averse to antiques, calligraphy, and paintings. She has managed the investment company alone for many years. Think about it, do you think she needs a watch like yours? It's meaningless for you to give her this kind of thing, which will only make people see you as a profiteer and make people unhappy. Besides, Jean Wan glanced at Ji Mingran's clothes. Although I know you are not short of money now, because you have Xing Yihan to support you, you don't have to be so generous in front of Mrs. Sue. What's the point of dressing so deliberately? She wants to help you because your studio is really in need of money now, but you show how rich you are everywhere. Her sympathy for you has been destroyed by you. Hearing this, Ji Mengrand immediately stared at Jean Wan, full of resentment. Why are you so sure what Mrs. Su was thinking at that time? Hearing this, Jean Wan smiled and tilted her head, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Of course I don't know what she was thinking, but I've been in this industry for so long, and I know how to cater to people's preferences. Who doesn't know how to give gifts? Didn't you see I gave it to her? Just the 2 pieces of junk you gave her. Ji Mengrand snorted. Junk? Jean Wan coldly glanced at her. It's not up to you to decide whether it's a rags or not. If I say you haven't done your homework, then you haven't. Not only do you know nothing about Mrs. Su, but you don't even know her preferences. Don't you know that Mrs. Su has no children? She has always been very fond of children, so she often does charity and helps those who have difficulties. Charity is her favorite cause, and MN Group has indeed participated in the charity industry in recent years, just like her. We have a common language, and this is where you can't interrupt. Ji Mengrand clenched her fists so hard that her fingers turned purple. She finally calmed herself down and didn't burst into curses on the street. Jean Wan said, also, the most basic point is that Mrs. Su believes in Buddhism. She often worships Buddha at home, and there is a specially built temple in her home. It can be seen how persistent she is in believing in Buddhism. The things I gave her are not expensive. They add up to less than 50 yuan. Compared to your watch, which is worth more than 1,000,000 yuan, it's really a far cry. But I just spent 50 yuan to cater to her preferences. What, are you not convinced? After speaking, Jean Wan didn't look at Ji Mengrand's incredulous expression. She opened the door of the taxi parked in front of her, got in, and left. She waved her hand and left. Ji Mengrand stiffened like a corpse. A few days later, MN Group received a new document from the government. After all, the real estate industry was now involved with many government agencies, and it had relations with various reconstruction and construction bureaus. When MN Group was abroad, it was still relatively free. But now that it had moved its headquarters back to China, and it had just returned to China, they had to fight wherever the government ordered them to. They had to reconstruct wherever they were told to, and they had to participate in any project they were told to participate in. Jean Wan looked at the newly issued document and fell into deep thought. There was no need to mention Shine Group's status in the United States and High City. Although MN Group was doing well now, it was still far from Shine Group. But the government actually wanted MN Group and Shine Group to jointly renovate High City Stadium and build it into the largest stadium in all the provinces and cities in China. The leader's intention was very clear. They couldn't control Shine Group, and neither could MN Group. If they wanted to stabilize the relationship between these two companies and the government for a certain period of time, they had to find a way to keep the two companies in check and balance each other. This was an opportunity to keep them in check and balance each other. But the people at the top didn't know that even if Shine Group had reached the point where no one could control it, Jean Wan didn't want to suppress them, let alone have any chance to keep Shine Group in check and balance each other. She just wanted to keep her own company. But the leaders of the government didn't think so. They certainly didn't want anyone to be too superior to others. Especially the Mo family and the Shine Group, which could shake the coastal cities nearby with a stomp of their feet. The higher-ups had all kinds of concerns, so they still wanted to suppress them secretly, but they dared not do it too obviously. Therefore, they wanted to target the MN Group, which could be considered as using the MN Group as a weapon. Jean Wan knew the purpose of the leaders, but if she wanted to keep MN Group in High City, she couldn't refuse this matter. Xia Tian had returned home to prepare for delivery these days and didn't come to the company. Xiao Ba stood in the office and saw Jean Wan was silent after receiving the document. Xiao Ba carefully leaned over, wanting to know what she was going to do now. But Jin Wan looked as usual. He couldn't tell if she was angry or something, but from the way she threw the document on the desk, he could tell that she was in a bad mood now. She didn't mind being used by the government. Anyway, the other party was Shine Group and wouldn't do anything to MN Group. But the other party was Shine Group, which was a big problem for Jin Wan. Chapter 461. Xiao Ba thought to herself, the government is forcing Jin Wan, the little sheep, into the cage of Mo Jingshan, the big bad wolf. Boss hadn't flown into a rage since she saw the document, which showed that she was really strong-willed now. Boss, about the matter with Shine Group, what are you going to do? Jin Wan calmly picked up the document again, glanced at it, then put it down, turned over the other documents on the table, and said flatly, I've spent so much effort to move the headquarters back to China. Now even if I want to run away, it's not easy. Since the higher-ups have made such a decision, I can't refuse. The document has been issued. What else can I do except to agree? That's true. Xiao Ba liked to see Jin Wan so calm and confident. Then, boss, do you have a plan in mind now? Jin Wan picked up the pen and signed the documents but didn't speak. It had been almost half a month since she was blocked in the corridor by Mo Jingshan because of the power failure in the apartment. During this half a month, she had been busy with the company's affairs and hadn't heard any news about Mo Jingshan. Of course, she didn't ask about him. She just pretended that what happened that day didn't happen. She thought she could stop mentioning it and thinking about it, but now she suddenly had to cooperate with Shine Group, and this project was a big one that couldn't be completed in a year or two, not to mention she had to go to the province and the city for meetings. If Shine Group didn't refuse this cooperation, Mo Jingshan would definitely show up in person. Arrange the project and make a few proposals. I'll talk to the planning department of Shine and find time to go to the city for a meeting to decide on the topic of the proposal. With that, Jin Wan buried herself in work and didn't want to continue talking about this matter. 2 days later, the proposals of the two companies were completed and sent to the government for approval and selection by the staff of each company. After finalizing the reconstruction plan, they contacted the two companies and set a time to go to the province for a meeting. After arriving at the meeting place set by the government, Jin Wan got out of the car, walked in, and was guided to the conference room by the staff inside. As soon as she walked in, she saw that the leaders of the province and the staff of the construction bureau were almost all present. They were sitting on the sofas around the luxurious conference room, drinking tea and talking. At the same time, she suddenly saw the man sitting on the leather sofa to her right. Mo Jingshan sat there quietly. Today, he was not dressed in black but in a moon-white casual shirt. His figure was tall and slender as usual, and his facial features were as handsome as the work of God. His ink-black eyes were cold and unapproachable. Sitting there, he was elegant, cold, and noble. His aura was indifferent and low-key, but it was also eye-catching. Mo Jingshan looked at Mo Jingshan. The memory of being blocked by him in the corridor flashed before her eyes. Her lips still felt numb, and she could still remember how hard he had kissed her that day. As soon as Jin Wan glanced in that direction, she saw that Mo Jingshan was not looking at her but was talking to a well-dressed man next to him. The two of them seemed to be chatting happily. After Jin Wan entered the door, he slowly turned his face. There was still a hint of a smile on his lips, but the emotions in his black eyes were cold and bottomless. Perhaps it was because there were many leaders and managers present who did not know much about their relationship in the past, or perhaps it was necessary to be courteous in such an environment. The man smiled at him. However, the smile was very faint, and his eyes emitted a cold luster, as well as 2 stars hidden in the night sky. Xiao Ba followed behind Jin Wan and secretly glanced in Mo Jingshan's direction. From the perspective of a bystander, she found that her previous guess was right. CEO Mo's eyes were clearly. The little sheep had finally been sent to the big bad wolf's mouth. Xiao Ba grumbled in her heart and was excited because it was rare to see Mo Jingshan at such a close distance. She remembered the first time she saw CEO Mo in real life, through a computer video. At that time, CEO Mo had fed them a mouthful of dog food. At that time, Boss and CEO Mo were so close. He could even heat a glass of milk for Boss at night and gently help her deal with the files on the computer. But now, Xiao Ba looked at Jin Wan's back with a sigh. Jin Wan had withdrawn her gaze and restrained her emotions. She expressionlessly walked to the leaders to say hello and then sat down on the sofa a little further away from Mo Jingshan. The scene of the talented people of the two worlds sitting together to talk was like a fight between masters. Both sides were inferior. The final result was that the plan of the MN Group's planning department was approved. Jin Wan was a little surprised by this result. After all, several other participating agencies or companies had also submitted their plans. Although the level of their plans was very ordinary, she knew the level of the planning department of the Shine Group. But when she saw the plans of the Shine Group, she knew how perfunctory they were this time. It was clear that the plans were made by interns who had just joined the company and were not familiar with the relevant business. In other words, Jin Wan won without doing anything. Although she did have the ability, she did win without doing anything. Based on her understanding of the Shine Group, it was not difficult to see that the Shine Group was giving in to the MN Group. Why did they give in to her? When it was announced that the MN Group's plan was approved, Jin Wan took a thoughtful look at Mo Jingshan. During the break of the meeting, Jin Wan got up and went out to make a phone call. When she came back from the phone call, she was about to go to the bathroom when she heard two government secretaries chatting inside. CEO Mo is so handsome. President Mo is so handsome. I heard that when he was still the president of the Mo Corporation in High City, he was already famous for his good looks. But later, the media didn't dare to publish the Mo family's affairs and President Mo's photos. Today is the first time I've seen President Mo in person. I really didn't expect that there could be such a good-looking man in the upper class. Look at the other leaders in the meeting just now, they are all either bald or have beer bellies, or they are all glowing like big leaders who eat and drink well all day. But President Mo is so calm. I don't know how old President Mo is. Chapter 462. AI, the more I talk, the more excited I get. I really don't know what kind of woman can subdue a man like CEO Mo. He's so handsome. I wonder if he's married yet. My home is in High City, but I was still in school a few years ago. I don't remember where I heard it from, but I heard that CEO Mo is married. That's impossible. With CEO Mo's looks, not to mention in this big high city, even in the entire country, no woman can match up to him. How could he get married so early? I also don't remember when I heard it. I think it was before he took over the Shine Group. At that time, he got married in High City. Which of the four prominent families in High City was it? I can't remember, and I don't have a deep impression of it. He's really married before. Oh my God, what kind of woman can be fancied by a male god like CEO Mo? She must have burned incense in her previous life. Outside the bathroom, Jin Wan, who might have really burned incense in her previous life, raised her hand and touched her nose, which was about to sneeze. But I haven't heard any news about his wife recently. Maybe they're divorced. Maybe they're divorced. I heard that marriages in rich families aren't very stable, but CEO Mo is really, really handsome. Just now, when I went over to pour President Mo a cup of tea, he glanced at me and even smiled at me. I felt like my soul was about to be hooked away. How is that possible? I was watching when you went over. CEO Mo clearly didn't smile. He smiled. He smiled at me. Dream on. CEO Mo is such a serious person. He didn't even smile at the provincial leaders. Do you expect him to smile at you? Is there a flower blooming on your face? How could he smile at you? Pfft, he's obviously smiling. Forget it if you don't believe me. But to be honest, there aren't many people in the Chinese circle who can compete with Shine Group. Those who are close to President Mo, not to mention getting married, even if they're good friends, they'll probably have a smooth life. After all, it's good to have a big tree to lean on. No one can topple a big tree like President Mo, that's true. No matter what, Shine Group is still the leader among the Chinese enterprises. What's more, the Mo family is still in High City. I really hope President Mo can stay in High City and not return to America. Previously, the government had applied for a partnership with Shine Group several times, but they were all rejected. Who would have thought that this time, they would actually agree to build a stadium with MN Group? All the projects that the government had approached them for in the past were obviously better than this, but this time, they actually agreed to cooperate with the government, and even MN Group got involved. Yeah, this is the first time I've seen CEO Mo attend a meeting at the government office. I'm so happy to see him in person. Jean Wan was about to go in when she passed by the restroom. When she heard these conversations, she thought about it and turned to the restroom on the other floor. When she came back, she went straight into the conference room and continued the meeting. In the evening, the government invited them to a nearby hotel for dinner. They prepared a luxurious private room and 2 large tables of sumptuous food and wine. Jean Wan first went to eat with them, and then because a client of the company was nearby, she took advantage of the fact that the leaders were exchanging pleasantries to sneak out of the hotel. She went to sit with the client and had a simple meal. She didn't meet the client for long. She just chatted briefly. 2 hours later, she asked Xiao Ba, who had been accompanying her, to get off work and go home. Then she hurried back to the hotel. The atmosphere in the private room was lively. After 3 rounds of wine, a leader was already singing happily. Jean Wan looked around and didn't see any seats, so she didn't go in and just chatted with the sober people in front of the door. After chatting for a while, she found that there seemed to be a few people missing in the private room. After asking, she learned that some of them had gone next door to play cards. Mo Jingshan wasn't here. Did he also go next door to play cards? However, after a while, the people next door who were playing cards came back. It was Shenmu who pushed the door open and came in. Shenmu hurriedly called the others over to continue playing cards, shouting something like 3 missing 1. When he came to Jean Wan, Shenmu asked with a smile, "CEO, do you want to play cards with us? It's just mahjong. You should know how to play. Let's forget about mahjong. I don't know how to play it." "Were you playing cards with them next door?" Jean Wan asked. Shenmu nodded and greeted a leader who came over with a smile. He then looked at Jean Wan. "You want to ask where CEO Mo is, don't you?" "No." However, the private room was noisy. Shenmu didn't seem to hear Jean Wan's words. He lowered his head and leaned close to her to whisper, "Recently, CEO Mo has been working overtime in the company and often stays up late. Earlier, he only drank a few glasses of wine and went next door to rest. But in the past 2 to 3 years, CEO Mo often suffers from insomnia. I think it won't be too quiet here. CEO, if you don't have anything else to do, help me buy some sleeping and calming medicine from the nearby pharmacy and send it to CEO Mo." With that, Shenmu stuffed a room card into Jean Wan's hand. Without looking at her expression, he smiled and called the other leaders who were about to play cards with him. Jean Wan wanted to say that there was no need to ask her for help with such a matter, but Shenmue was a little tipsy and was excitedly calling the leaders to play cards with him. Clearly, he felt that the only person he could trust to enter Mo Jingshan's room was Jin Wan, so he didn't think twice and directly handed the room card to her. And he actually asked her to buy sleeping and calming medicine for Mo Jingshan. Not only did Shenmue call for people to fill up the empty seats, but he also successfully gathered a second table of people to play cards. Just as he was about to leave the private room, he seemed to remember Jin Wan. He turned back to see that Jin Wan was still sitting in her original position and had no intention of helping him. He hurriedly clasped his hands together and bowed to Jin Wan, whispering, "Ancestor, please do me a favor. I'm busy serving the leaders and playing cards. I really can't leave. Please do me a favor." Then, Shenmue gave her an earnest and pleading smile before turning around and following the high-spirited leaders to the mahjong room next door. Jin Wan looked at Shenmue's drunken back view with disdain. She then glanced at the golden room card in her hand. The author's words, "Today, there were 80,000 words." The female lead's career, growth, emotions, and emotional changes were all necessary. Some of the plots had to be written in the future even if she didn't want to write them now. Sooner or later, they would take up this space, so she might as well write them all at the same time. That way, when she focused on writing the plot of the male and female leads, there wouldn't be these troublesome people appearing. In the future, there would be more and more scenes between the male and female leads. Some suspicious points and foreshadowing had already begun to surface. Chapter 463. CEOG, aren't you going to play cards? Someone by the side asked. Jin Wan smiled and shook her head. She chatted with a neatly dressed old CEO for a while. The old CEO noticed the item in her hand and asked her what was with this room card. She casually placed the room card on the table. "It's nothing. A friend left it here for me to keep temporarily." Shenmue had already left for 20 minutes, but Jin Wan still had no intention of getting up. 20 minutes later, Shenmue called. Jin Wan glanced at the caller ID, picked up her bag, and the room card on the table, and turned to leave. When she reached the door and picked up the call, Shenmue's voice could be heard. It was very noisy. As expected, he was really playing cards. There were people constantly urging him to play cards. "CEOG, have you been there?" Shenmue took some time out of his busy schedule to ask. "No, the room card is still with me. I'll hand it to the housekeeping staff before I leave." "You can go get it then." The other end of the line was silent for a moment. Suddenly, she heard the people playing cards on the other end clamoring. Xiaoxin, why did you suddenly stand up? Are you not playing anymore? Continue, it's not over yet. You can't just leave after winning for so long. Hurry up and continue. Then I won't trouble CEOG. I'll go to the pharmacy myself." Shenmue did not say much. It sounded like he was preparing to leave the room. However, the leaders around him kept pestering him to not let him leave. It was indeed not good for someone who had just won for so long to leave just like that. It had already caused many people's dissatisfaction. Jin Wan heard the commotion on the other end and that Shenmue seemed to have really stood up to open the door. She turned to look at the door of the room next door. After a moment of silence, she said, "Forget it. Continue playing cards. You can't afford to offend those leaders at the table." After speaking, she did not wait for Shenmue to speak and hung up. Jin Wan walked out of the hotel and searched for a long time before finding a pharmacy. She went in to buy some calming medicine, but the person in the pharmacy said that it was best not to take too much of it. He recommended some calming medicine and incense to help her sleep. Nowadays, some people pursued fashion and often put some essential oils and incense in their rooms. The hotel next to it was a 6-star hotel, after all, and there were often elegant CEOs staying there. Therefore, it was possible to have a modern incense burner. As for the calming medicinal soup, it was better to boil it and heat it up. Not to mention that it was already very late, the rooms next to the private room were only for temporary rest. They weren't suites with their own kitchens, so it wasn't easy to prepare things like medicinal soup. Jean Wan made her choice. For a moment, she was unsure of how serious Shenmu's claim that Mo Jingxin had been suffering from insomnia for the past few years was. Medicine that entered his mouth could not be taken casually. In the end, she bought a bag of incense to help him sleep. She was worried that there was nothing in the room that could hold incense, so she specifically went to the housekeeping department to ask the staff for a small silver incense burner. Sure enough, there were too many elegant people nowadays. The hotel actually had a spare, and this small incense burner was quite exquisite. She went to Mo Jingxin's room and knocked on the door. Seeing that there was no movement, she guessed that Mo Jingxin had fallen asleep. She used the room card to open the door. She pushed open the door and entered, only to discover that Mo Jingxin was not asleep as she had expected. The man was sitting on one side of the sofa, rubbing his forehead with one hand. He seemed to have a headache from not being able to fall asleep. When he heard the sound of the door, he raised his eyes indifferently. A few buttons on his white shirt were unbuttoned, and his handsome features were indifferent. He lifted his eyelids slightly and glanced at her coldly. He clearly did not expect the person to be Jean Wan. When he heard the knock, he thought it was Shenmu. Knowing that the other party had a room card, he could not be bothered with him. In the end, the moment he raised his eyes, he saw Jean Wan walking in with a small bag. The moment their eyes met, Jean Wan calmly shifted her gaze away. Her expression was indifferent as she brought in the incense burner and the things she bought from the pharmacy. Shenmu asked me to buy some things to help you sleep. I didn't buy any medicine. I only bought some incense. Try it and see if you can sleep well. Jean Wan did not look at him. As she spoke, she nimbly placed the items on the coffee table and quickly placed the incense block into the small incense burner. She found several long matches from the box of the incense block and lit them. She gently shook the matches in her hands before placing everything on the coffee table. After doing all this, she did not look at Mo Jingxin's eyes. She took 2 steps back and did not raise her eyes. CEO, rest well. I won't disturb you any longer. Jean Wan. The man called her name. His cold and low voice was especially clear in the quiet room. Jean Wan did not turn back and walked to the door. However, before she could open the door, the man had already arrived. His long arm reached out to stop her from opening the door. He slammed the door shut. She paused and turned to look at the man. It seemed like he was really resting in the room next door because he was not feeling well today. The man's short, black hair drooped slightly as he lowered his head to look at her, casting a faint shadow on his face. The bright light in the room shone a trace of warmth on his face. His deep, black eyes lost their usual coldness and majesty. His gaze seemed to have transformed into a ray of light as he looked at her. Even though he did not lean too close, the movement of his arm against the door almost trapped Jean Wan between them. Jean Wan leaned slightly to the side against the door and turned to meet the man's pitch-black, deep gaze. CEO, you didn't drink today, right? I don't think you need me to remind you about propriety. What is propriety? The man seemed to be smiling. He lowered his eyes to look at her clear and cold eyes. After returning to China, you didn't even say hello to me when we met again. Is this your propriety? Jean Wan relaxed her brows and said calmly, although MN Group is doing well now, it first established itself in England and has just returned to High City. In front of the big shots in this city, I'm still a newborn calf. They can easily crush me like a grasshopper at any time. If I don't act properly, if I don't know how to behave properly, I'm afraid I'll die without a burial place as soon as I return to China. CEO, my propriety to you is no different from that to others. Jingxin turned her face and pinched her chin with one hand. He did not use much force and his thin lips moved slightly. Didn't you say you didn't plan to come back after going to England? Why did you come back? N. Chapter 464. So, if Xia Tian can continue to help you in High City, are you really going to leave and never come back? The man lowered his eyes and looked at her with clear eyes. It didn't seem like he was interrogating her, but his ambiguous posture and oppression all showed the difference in height and physique between a man and a woman. Even if he was not feeling well today, as long as he didn't intend to let her go, she couldn't get out of this door. Jin Wan suddenly smiled and turned to look at Jingxin with a smile. She suddenly turned around and leaned against the door. As if tempting him with her red lips, she gently exhaled. She kissed him softly and warmly, with her unique fragrance and elegant and charming light perfume blowing against his ear. As the man stared at her with dark eyes, she smiled and said, "Not only will I never come back, but we don't even need to meet again in this life, do we?" As she spoke, she raised her hand and gently hooked the collar of the man's shirt. She looked at him seductively and coldly and said lightly with a smile, but the smile was not real. "On the day I signed the divorce papers, I said on the phone, Jingxin, I won't come back." She gently pointed her finger at his heart, slightly raised the corners of her eyes, and with a faint smile, she said clearly, "I won't come back." When she said that she would never return, she did not refer to the Imperial Garden, nor did she refer to this city. But where she was pointing with her hand now. He held her hand that stopped in front of his chest and pushed her directly against the door. He firmly pressed her body wrapped in the summer dress and said in a low voice, "CEOG is really getting what she wants now. When she wants to be ruthless, even men are ashamed of their inferiority. When we meet again, we will be strangers. You can be heartless." Jin Wan raised her eyebrows. There was no grievance or helplessness in her voice. She questioned him directly, "Speaking of heartless, CEO, I'm afraid you've forgotten that you said you were dead. I'm afraid no one in this world can compare to you in heartlessness. How dare I argue with you? But then again, even if I'm really heartless, CEO, what right do you have to control me?" Jingxin closed his eyes and frowned for a moment. Jin Wan didn't miss his expression, but she still looked at him sharply and didn't give in at all. Until the man suddenly withdrew his hand from the door behind her and said indifferently, "All right, you can go." Jin Wan stood by the door and didn't move, but she could see that he really didn't seem to be feeling well. She didn't have the good intention to go over and care for him, so she took out her cell phone from her bag and scrolled through her contacts. "Is Qin Siding still in High City? If you're not feeling well, I'll call him over, or any other doctor you trust will do." Before she finished speaking, the man who was about to leave suddenly turned back. Before Jin Wan could react, he grabbed her wrist, causing her to lose the strength in her hand. Her cell phone fell on the carpet by the door, and then he pulled her into his arms with his long arm and bent over her without saying a word. Jin Wan's brain went blank. The moment she was brought into the man's arms by his strong arm, she hurriedly stepped back and tried to push him away with her hands and feet, but she was afraid that her high-heeled shoes would step on the phone, so she could only stagger into his arms. Her brain was almost broken by this deep and heavy kiss, and she could only feel the heat in his breath. This time, he didn't linger on her lips for a long time like that night when he blocked her in the corridor, but deeply tasted her tongue, not letting go of any inch of her mouth. "Yu, no, Yu, Ji-won punched and kicked him fiercely, but he still turned around and brought her to the sofa not far behind him. When he pressed her into the sofa, she bit him hard, and the man paused in pain because of the force of her bite. Just like that, Ji-won raised her hand and pushed him half an arm's length away. Her eyes were cold, and she scolded through gritted teeth, "Mo Jingshin, the flowers at home are not as fragrant as the wild flowers outside, right? When your wife was with you, you tried your best to push me away. Now that you're divorced, things have changed. Now you're shameless." However, the man just sneered, and the darkness in his eyes did not fade. He pinched her chin and kissed her again, stopping her breath. It was obvious that he was determined to solidify the infamy of being shameless. They struggled like a fight, but the difference in strength between the man and the woman was too great, and the winner was decided. Ji-won panted and turned her head to avoid him. Rape within marriage is illegal, much less rape after divorce. Mo Jingshin, don't go too far. The woman's usually delicate and soft appearance was now filled with an unfamiliar ruthlessness. Her bright, watery eyes were filled with heartlessness and coldness. Mo Jingshin no longer kissed her, but after pressing her into the sofa, he did not intend to let her get up. His long arm pulled her into his embrace, ignoring Ji-won's struggle. He pressed against her and held her. When Ji-won was about to scold him, he buried his breath in her neck, speaking softly and huskily, "Don't move. Mo Jingshin." The man leaned against her body and did not speak. The room was extremely quiet. Aside from their breathing, there was only the barely discernible smoke from the small incense burner on the coffee table. The sleeping incense had the fragrance of Chinese medicine and a faint lavender fragrance. Mo Jingshin's breath slowly calmed down. He didn't get up immediately but held her. Holding her, he stroked her palm, separated her fingers little by little, and clenched them tightly. Then he said slowly and meaningfully, "All the difficult paths have been taken, and all the things that should be ended have been ended. You are no longer the Ji-won you used to be." It was unclear whether Ji-won understood or not. She paused for a moment and then sneered. "Of course I'm no longer the Ji-won of the past." Mo Jingshin did not speak. He did not even bring the topic back to the previous sentence. "Mo Jingshin, can you not press against me? There's no relationship between us. You're simply, don't move." His tone was flat as he cut her off. Ji-won closed her eyes. She was slightly impatient, but the experience from 3 years ago had taught her to control all her dissatisfaction. She suppressed her anger and did not speak. She did not resist and only waited for him to let go of her. However, what she did not expect was that after Mo Jingshin stopped speaking, his tall and broad body pressed against hers. His body was initially tense due to discomfort, but at this moment, he relaxed slightly. Chapter 465. Mo Jingshin actually fell asleep on her just like that. Faced with this unexpected predicament, Ji-won subconsciously wanted to push the man on top of her away. But as soon as her hand touched the man's hair, she suddenly remembered his slightly frowning expression and Shinmu's words that he had been suffering from insomnia for years and hadn't had a good sleep for a long time. Should her heart soften? She didn't even think about it. In her heart, she directly refused. She shouldn't. However, Ji-won was silent for a moment. Feeling the man's steady breath on her neck, she could only keep lying on the sofa and look at the bright crystal lights in the room. Forget it. Just let him sleep for 5 minutes. After all, she had just returned to High City, and MN Group's foundation in High City was not stable yet. Right now, their relationship was no longer that of a divorced husband and wife. They no longer loved each other. There were many things that didn't need to be said. However, it was precisely because she planned to treat him as the sky of High City from now on that they would be strangers if they ever met again. After all, if she really offended him and angered him, she probably wouldn't have any good days in High City in the future. For the sake of Mo Jingshan's status, she wouldn't offend him. She would give him 5 minutes to sleep. Only 5 minutes. She slowly let go of the man's hair and then awkwardly and laboriously retracted her hands to her sides. Although Mo Jingshan was on top of her, making it impossible for her to leave, he did not do anything except kiss her domineeringly. Even after he fell asleep, he was still very well behaved, holding her waist with one hand. Jin Wan's cell phone fell to the ground by the door, and she had nothing in her hand. Every second felt like a year. In the first minute, she was still thinking that when she left the room, she must not be seen by other leaders or bosses. Otherwise, in the business world, all kinds of romantic things were common. If they saw it, she didn't know what they would think of her. Before the divorce, her entire life revolved around Mo Jingshan. If it could be said that even her studio and other aspects of her life were all because of Mo Jingshan, then after the divorce, it was as though she had completely separated herself from Mo Jingshan. She had a teacher and a friend in England. She had a noble and a friend. In the past 3 years, she had walked step by step on her own. She did not rely on Mo Jingshan at all. So, of course, she didn't want others to see her and suspect that she had slept with Mo Jingshan or that she had slept with some important people along the way to get up. No one liked to be judged by others in such a way that all their hard work would be erased. Furthermore, after the divorce, just as Mo Jingshan said, her life would return to its original trajectory. It didn't matter what the starting point was, but the divorce was indeed an important point in her life. The next minute she was still thinking about these things. 3 to 4 minutes later, the small incense burner on the coffee table still emitted light smoke. However, Jin Wan's eyelids gradually found it difficult to keep open. She slowly blinked several times, reminding herself not to fall asleep just like that. However, in less than 5 minutes, her eyelids were completely unable to keep open, and her breathing gradually evened out. The night passed quickly. The sound of running water could be heard from the bathroom. All of a sudden, there was a knock on the door. It was a little urgent and careful. Xiao Ba knocked on the door for about 2 minutes before the door was abruptly opened. The curtains in the room were open, and light shone in from behind. The man's upper body was almost naked. His handsome and perfect figure was smooth, and his lower body was wrapped in a white bath towel. He held a bathrobe that he had grabbed at the last minute. His ink-black hair was as black as ink from being wet, but the main point was that his face was excessively handsome. Because he saw that the person standing outside the door was a girl, Mo Jingshan put the bathrobe on. As he tied the belt, he coldly asked, looking for Jin Wan. Xiao Ba was already scared silly by the door. Earlier on, she had already instinctively raised her hands to cover her face and eyes. However, she still couldn't help but blush. She carefully parted her fingers. Seeing that Boss Missouri had already put on the bathrobe, she finally put her hands down. She looked inside and saw that Jin Wan's bag and cell phone were on the ground. Jin Wan's sunscreen jacket was also on the sofa. Even the hairband that Jin Wan usually used was scattered on the sofa. Xiao Ba forcefully swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Without even thinking, she could guess what had happened last night. This was Mo Jingshan. If Boss had really slept with Boss Missouri, no one would dare to say a word. After all, they were husband and wife in the past. But last night, Jin Wan clearly did not show any signs of contacting Mo Jingshan. Why did she become like this early in the morning? Mo, our CEO, she's really here. Xiao Ba's face was red as she stuttered, but she did not dare to look at Mo Jingshan's face. I called her, but she didn't pick up, so I came to look for her. Earlier on, I bumped into Assistant Shin. He seemed to have been playing cards all night and didn't sleep. He said that if CEOG didn't go back, she might be in this room. I didn't expect CEOMO to be here. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disturb you. I'm only here to look for CEOG. Mo Jingshin unhurriedly tied the belt on his bathrobe. He glanced at the direction of the bedroom. She's still sleeping. Hearing these words, it was as though something had really happened between him and Jin Won last night. If he was not Mo Jingshin, Xiao Ba would have already rushed in with her bag and yelled "pervert" to save Jin Won. However, the other party was Mo Jingshin. Furthermore, at such a close distance, he was unbelievably handsome. She made an "oh" sound and took a step back with a red face. She softly said, "Then when CEOG wakes up, please have her give me a call. I'll wait for her in the hotel lobby." Mo Jingshin's expression was cold and he did not speak. Xiao Ba continued to take a step back. With a pang sound, the door in front of her was slammed shut. Xiao Ba leaned against the wall outside the door. Her heart was beating like a drum. This time, not only was she able to see President Mo through a computer video, nor was she able to see President Mo from a few meters away. She had even accidentally seen the legendary boss Mo's bathing scene from less than a meter away. So handsome. Boss had actually slept with CEO Mo again. Did that mean that in the future, they could do whatever they wanted in Haiqing? When Jin Won opened her eyes, she was slightly dazed. What was going on? Why did she really fall asleep? She glanced out the window. The sky was already bright. She abruptly realized that she was actually lying on the bed. She immediately sat up, yanking the blanket aside to look at the clothes on her body. Aside from the sunscreen jacket, she was still wearing everything else. Chapter 466. More importantly, how did she end up on the bed after falling asleep? Jin Won rubbed her messy hair and got off the bed. When she walked out of the living room, the first thing she saw was Mo Jingshin, who had already changed his clothes. She paused for a moment. She saw that the man had most likely just showered and had a good night's sleep. He seemed to be in a good state of mind. She subconsciously glanced down at her own clothes and confirmed that nothing had happened last night. It was likely that he had carried her onto the bed after falling asleep. She recalled that when she was in Aolan International before the divorce, she had fallen asleep on the sofa because of a stomachache. That night, Mo Jingshin must have carried her to the bedroom to sleep. After all, he was the only one in the world who could make her defenseless when she fell asleep and be carried to the bed unconsciously. Jin Won glanced at the small incense burner on the coffee table. She could roughly guess why she had fallen asleep within a few minutes last night. This was truly an unexpected situation. She did not speak. She had already said everything she needed to say last night. She walked over to pick up her coat from the sofa and put it on. She saw that Mo Jingshin had already placed her phone and bag on the cabinet by the door. She walked over to pick up her bag and opened the door without saying a word. The moment she opened the door, she turned to look at the man who had no intention of stopping her. The morning sun landed on his body. The moon-white shirt from yesterday had disappeared and was replaced by a deep black. She looked at him. CEO, you and I are both people with status. You know what you should and shouldn't do. It's already been more than 3 years. Let's just treat it as if nothing happened, okay? Mo Jingshin calmly looked at her. He did not agree or reject her. He only said, "Aren't you going to wash up before leaving?" "No need. I'll go back and wash up." Finishing her words, she opened the door and turned to leave. The sound of her high heels grew softer and softer. In the end, it was replaced by the sound of the elevator. It was the sound of her leaving. The room returned to silence. Mo Jingshan watched as the door closed once more. He turned to look outside. The sun was warm, and the blue sky stretched as far as the eye could see. It was as though Jin Wan's new life had been reborn, filled with confidence and vitality. From the corner of his eye, he suddenly caught sight of a woman's hair tie on the sofa. He walked over. He picked it up. After Jin Wan left the room, in order not to be seen by others, she did not look for Shenmue. When she went downstairs, she suddenly saw Xiao Ba waiting in the hall. Xiao Ba hurried over and asked with a smile, "Boss, you're awake. How did you sleep last night?" Jin Wan immediately squinted at her. "When did you come?" "I arrived half an hour ago." Special Assistant Shin said you were in CEO Mo's room. When I went to knock on the door, CEO Mo said you were still sleeping. I guess you were exhausted last night. Xiao Ba's eyes lit up as she giggled. Jin Wan's footsteps paused in an instant. She forced herself to stand firm on the spot and then turned to Xiao Ba with a jerk. "Last night wasn't what you think. Oh, reuniting after a long separation and rekindling old love, I've never experienced this before. It's definitely different from my naive imagination." I understand. Little Mina continued to grin. Jin Wan, she didn't explain any further and walked straight out. She originally planned to drive, but Xiao Ba eagerly invited her to sit in the back. Jin Wan did not reject and only said that she wanted to go back to take a shower. Xiao Ba directly drove her back. On the way back, the car was very quiet. Xiao Ba saw that Jin Wan's expression was especially stern and did not dare to ask any more nosy questions. She only drove quietly. Jin Wan sat in the back seat. After thinking for a long time, she picked up her phone and looked for Qin Siding's number. It had been more than 3 years since they last contacted each other. She did not know if Qin Siding was still in High City, nor did she know if he had changed his number. Back then, Jin Wan had cleared all of Qin Siding's contact information, but she still kept Qin Siding's number. After all, Qin Siding had helped her with many things. She hesitated for a moment. Although she should have made up her mind, she couldn't be an ungrateful person. Not long after, the call was picked up. Qin Siding's clear and magnetic voice was the same as before. "Hello. Hello." Jin Wan had forgotten that she was using a different number from 3 years ago. She directly asked, "Dr. Qin, it's been many years since we last met. Are you still in High City?" The other side of the phone was silent for a long time. There seemed to be a pause. After a moment, Qin Siding finally asked, "Jin Wan?" "Yes, it's me." Jin Wan's voice was calm. "After returning to the country, I haven't been able to meet Dr. Qin. In the end, I still have to call to trouble you. I'm really ashamed. I heard that you've returned. Why are you being so polite with me?" Jin Wan did not continue the small talk and directly said, "I heard from Shenmue that Imo Jingshan has been suffering from insomnia for the past few years. What's going on?" Qin Siding clearly did not expect Jin Wan to mention Imo Jingshan. He was silent for a moment and did not ask further. He only answered, "For the past 3 years, he has indeed had this illness, but it's not as serious as Shenmue said. It's true that he often has trouble sleeping at night, but this can't be considered a long-term illness. More importantly, he often works overtime and stays up late. There are all kinds of people in the country's business world, and the atmosphere of the upper class is inseparable from alcohol. It's inevitable that he will drink some alcohol. After enduring day after day, his body will definitely feel uncomfortable. Generally speaking, it's because he doesn't sleep well. Coupled with tiredness and excessive socializing, he will occasionally have a headache. However, after a good night's sleep, he'll be fine. It's because of the lack of rest. That's right. Ever since your divorce. Chin Siding paused. Ever since 3 years ago, he has been constantly working hard. He rarely listens to others' advice and goes home early to rest. He's just taking advantage of his youth. If it were someone in his 40s or 50s, he would have died long ago. All right, I understand. Thank you, Dr. Chin. Why are you suddenly asking about him? Is there something going on between the two of you? No, don't misunderstand. I just met him last night and heard about this from Shinmu. After returning to the country, I haven't had the chance to greet Dr. Chin. I thought of giving you a call and asked in passing. Chin Siding smiled and did not ask further. All right, we'll meet again when we have time. But right now, you're a busy person. I'm afraid I won't be as busy as you. Dr. Chin, you're being too polite. You hold a scalpel to save people, while I'm in the business world. I've only learned how to be treacherous and become an unscrupulous businessman. How would I dare to compare myself to Dr. Chin? Not bad. It's been a few years since we last met, and you've become so polite. Chapter 467. Boss. Something happened. In MN Group's office, Jean Wan had just returned from meeting a business partner. Before she could sit down, she heard Xiaoba run in, rushing over with a newspaper in her hand. What are you doing? How old are you? You should have gained some experience after staying in England for the past few years. Why are you still so impatient? Jean Wan glanced at her unhappily. Something really happened. Xiaoba slammed the newspaper on the office table. Look, when you went to the meeting and dinner with the leaders in the city last time, didn't the CEO Zhang of Minghai Company take advantage of you at the dinner table? I don't know who took this photo of him touching your hand and sold it to the media. Right now, the financial news is almost taken over by gossip. They're all saying that you slept all the way up. A bunch of people in the industry are gossiping about you. I think it won't be long before the news of your marriage with Mo Wen will be revealed again. Jean Wan finally took the newspaper. This photo was clearly taken from an angle. CEO Zhang was indeed sitting next to me, but he asked me to pass him a toothpick. The toothpick was so small, and it was hard to see it clearly. It looks like I took the initiative to hold his hand. It's just a matter of the angle, Jean Wan said without changing her expression. Of course I know it's a matter of the angle. I also know that you've rejected so many men. Although you usually do what you should, you've never been taken advantage of by anyone. This photo clearly shows that some companies are jealous of our MN group and are deliberately targeting you. But I heard that CEO Zhang's wife is famous for being a tough woman in high city. Because her family used to be in the loan business, she's especially domineering. Right now, we can use some money to suppress the media and stop them from spreading such nonsense, but CEO Zhang's wife is not easy to deal with. Earlier, I heard from the security guard that a group of people ran to our company and splashed 2 buckets of dog blood. They stood outside and called you a vixen, really? So lively. Different from Xiaoba's anxious and worried expression, Jean Wan curved the corner of her lips, turned to the window, and looked downstairs. I can't see them now. The security guard has already sent them away. But I'm afraid that those people who came to make trouble must have been photographed by some busybody. I've already spoken to the media, but I'm afraid that CEO Zhang's wife will continue to make trouble. Even if the media blows over, they won't be able to stop privately. Is CEO Zhang's wife so tough? I heard that CEO Zhang did have an affair 2 years ago, but it was only when he came back from a business trip with the new secretary of his company. They hugged each other in the car ambiguously. In the end, it was discovered by his wife. I heard that CEO Zhang's secretary was dragged into the company by his wife when she was at work. She stripped the secretary's clothes in front of everyone and whipped the secretary. It was said that because she was naked at that time, even the flesh on her chest was smashed. Later, many policemen went to the scene to stop the matter. Otherwise, the secretary would have been beaten to death on the spot. Hearing this, Jean Wan raised her brows thoughtfully. It seemed like she was indeed a vicious and merciless person with a powerful background that no one dared to provoke. If this misunderstanding was not resolved, she would inevitably have to be careful in High City in the future. Isn't Feng Ling free in America? Do you want her to come back to accompany you for a few months? Xiao Ba asked. No need. She's being detained by Nanheng and can't come at all. Besides, there's no need to look for her just because there's a little danger. Then what should we do? Hire a few more bodyguards for you. Jean Wan smiled as she glanced at Xiao Ba. She then picked up the newspaper to take a look. In the newspaper, it appeared as though she had taken the initiative to hold CEO Zhang's hand. From this angle, she was smiling very brightly. Furthermore, she was sitting very close to CEO Zhang. It did appear as though they were intimate. She put down the newspaper again and said, "Help me make an appointment with CEO Zhang tonight. Tell him I'll wait for him at the KTV near our company." Xiao Ba looked at her with a dumbfounded expression. What time is it now? Shouldn't we avoid arousing suspicion? You actually want me to help you make an appointment with CEO Zhang? And meet him personally? And at a place like KTV? Jean Wan glanced at her. Can't you bring more people from the company with you? Ming Hai Company can be considered a stable business partner of ours. Firstly, I can't lose my reputation. Secondly, I can't destroy the contract between our two companies. I can't shed all pretense of cordiality with them. Then why are you doing this? Don't ask so much. Just do as I say. Xiao Ba pursed her lips. If I help you make an appointment with CEO Zhang, he will definitely come. He won't care so much. In any case, even if he really has an affair, his wife will only teach him a lesson and won't do anything to him. I can tell that CEO Zhang has long been drooling over you. If he can do anything ambiguous with you, he will most likely be willing to come regardless of the risk. It's even better that he's willing to come. It saves us the trouble. Jean Wan casually tossed the newspaper on her desk into the wastebasket. Just do as I say. Tonight, go to KTV with CEO Zhang. You can go back to work after making the appointment. Don't be affected by this matter. Xiao Ba truly did not understand what Jean Wan was thinking. However, when she thought about how Jean Wan rarely suffered losses, she knew what she was doing. Furthermore, due to her beautiful face, many women were jealous of her. Not to mention the women in the country, even when she was abroad, there would often be people gossiping about her behind her back. The tallest tree in the forest was the first to be destroyed by the wind. Those who stood too tall and were too beautiful would inevitably be provoked in the open. Then I'll send a few more bodyguards tonight. I'll also send some of the company's male employees. I'll also have a few assistants to go with you. There's no need to do that. Just call a few of the people who usually go with CEO Zhang when we discuss our cooperation. The most important thing is to be more natural. Don't make it seem like you're going to fight. All right. Could it be that they weren't going to fight? Xiao Ba scratched her head. She saw the hot water bottle Jean Wan had placed on the sofa and walked over to pick it up. Boss, is your period coming today? Does your stomach hurt? Do you want me to help you brew some brown sugar water? All right. The hot water bottle is too heavy. I have a heating pad here for you to use. Jean Wan waved her hand. Go back to work first. Right now, I'm not as afraid of the cold as before. It doesn't hurt as much. I'll be fine after drinking some hot water. Chapter 468. That night, there were many security guards gathered below MN Group. However, Jean Wan did not bring a single one with her. Just as she had requested, she only brought along the secretaries and assistants who usually followed her around to socialize, including Xiao Ba. When they arrived at the KTV, CEO Zhang was already waiting there. However, he had specially brought along 2 bodyguards to wait outside the KTV. The moment he saw Jean Wan, CEO Zhang's eyes immediately lit up as he approached. He reached out to hold Jean Wan's hand. Jean Wan calmly avoided him, smiling as she said, CEO Zhang, this KTV is crowded. Let's go in and chat. Her words were somewhat ambiguous. CEO Zhang immediately nodded and extended his hand to invite Jean Wan in. As they walked, he said, CEO G, I'm really sorry. I didn't expect that such a thing would happen when I asked you to pass me a toothpick that day. Please don't take the news too seriously. I'll definitely explain it clearly to the media. It's not important whether you explain it or not. People like us usually use the same method when faced with such baseless news. We use money to buy over the media and suppress them. It's not difficult to erase the rumors in the media, but what's important is the relationship between CEO Zhang and CEO Zhang. It can't be changed because of such a thing. Jean Wan smiled as she spoke. She winked at CEO Zhang and walked in. CEO Zhang did not expect Jean Wan to be so sensible. He pushed open the KTV room's door and smiled as he invited her in. He saw that the people accompanying her were still the secretaries and assistants she usually brought to discuss their cooperation. She did not bring anyone else with her, so he believed that she was only here to discuss their cooperation and to have a chat. However, since Jean Wan was the one who took the initiative to invite him, and the media had also spread such rumors, CEO Zhang instinctively felt that perhaps Jean Wan was also interested in him. After sitting down, CEO Zhang opened a bottle of wine and placed it in front of Jean Wan. He took the initiative to lean in to say, to be honest, I was also very surprised when I saw the photo in the media. I didn't expect there to be so many despicable people in our business circle. They clearly saw that there was no relationship between the two of us, yet they deliberately took such a photo to make people panic. CEO G, your reputation has been affected. I'm really sorry. Jean Wan glanced at the wine on the coffee table and did not pick it up to drink. As CEO Zhang inched closer to her, she stealthily avoided him. She maintained a calm smile on her face. It's just a toothpick. CEO Zhang, don't take it to heart. Didn't we talk about future cooperation during our previous meal? I'm afraid that you've forgotten all about this matter, haven't you? No, how could I forget my agreement with CEO G? Isn't it just to increase MN Group's profits by another 10%? That's fine, that's fine. I agreed to it back then. CEO G, did you bring the contract with you? It's not just 10%. I've been calculating for the past few days. MN Group has contributed more than half of the planning and manpower for this project. I mean to increase it by 25%. On top of the 10% you agreed to last time, I'll add another 15%. At this point, Jean Wan smiled at CEO Zhang's suddenly stunned expression. CEO Zhang, we're not asking for an exorbitant price. You should know that without MN Group's planning and our core personnel, this project can't be completed. It's reasonable for me to increase this portion. This. CEO Zhang hesitated for a moment. After Xiaoba handed him the contract with an eager expression, he picked it up and glanced through it. He had thought that Jin Wan invited him here today to talk about the scandal. He wanted to confess to her that he was indeed interested in her and hoped that he could have a chance to see her more in the future or develop a deeper relationship with her. However, he did not expect that Jin Wan, who had been smiling so brightly at the door and easily misunderstood, now that she had entered the private room, she was serious and only here to raise the price. But this time, he did bring Jin Wan trouble, and Jin Wan's request was actually within a reasonable range. However, he had never thought of raising the price by more than 10%. After all, this 25% difference in profits was more than 300 million yuan. It was only a project that could last for a few months. Although it was indeed profitable, this MN group really knew how to make money. CEO Zhang, are you not satisfied with this price? It just so happens that our cooperation hasn't officially begun. Neither side has sent any relevant personnel, and our time hasn't been occupied. It's fine if we stop this new cooperation now. Recently, I've been busy with trivial matters and really don't have the time to discuss these matters. If we can't settle this project today, I won't have the time in the future. I can only send my assistant and secretary. They're only following orders, and it won't be easy for us to negotiate. Besides, CEO Zhang and I are very close. If it's someone else talking to you, it won't be easy for you to negotiate, will it? CEO Zhang stared at Jin Wan's smiling expression and suddenly cursed in his heart, "Mother." This woman looked like a beautiful and harmless little rabbit, but why was she so shrewd in her bones? No wonder MN Group developed so quickly in the hands of a young woman like her. It seemed like she really had some tricks up her sleeve. Taking advantage of this opportunity, he couldn't let go of this cooperation project. Otherwise, not only would he lose 300 million yuan, but he would also lose all the profits to his other partners. If the scandal hadn't happened, perhaps he could put on a cold face and hang on for a while longer, keeping as much profit as he could. But now, he was stuck at a time like this. Jin Wan had clearly shown that she didn't intend to insist on cooperating with him. It seemed like she actually quite minded meeting him again. If he didn't even have a chance in the future, he wouldn't be able to put on a cold face and put on airs. Right now, Jin Wan was giving him a choice. She was also clearly telling him that this was the last time they would meet before the project was confirmed. If they could come to an agreement, then they would. If they couldn't, then they would part ways and never see each other again. It was also a good way to avoid arousing suspicion. Everything was reasonable, and no one could find fault with it. CEO Zhang smiled and glanced at the contract in his hand. He seemed to be wavering, but his words were still somewhat unhappy. He said, "CEO G is really amazing. Don't tell me that photo was taken by CEO G." Chapter 469. Well, with that one sentence of hers, it could be said that she had revealed all of his secrets. It seemed like Jin Wan knew about his ambiguous relationship with his secretary and how his wife came knocking on his door. Thus, Jin Wan had no interest in him at all. From start to finish, she was only here for this contract. She was clearly using this opportunity to raise the price. Furthermore, she had smiled ambiguously at him outside the KTV earlier. If people outside saw this, they would easily misunderstand what was going on inside. If Jin Wan was more careful, his wife would most likely be on her way here. Thinking about it carefully, the person who intentionally leaked the news of their meeting to his wife was most likely Jin Wan. In other words, the only person who could protect him right now was Jin Wan. Or rather, the two of them could only protect each other. If she let go of this matter and did not explain herself, his wife would most likely cause some trouble here today. However, Jean Wan was right. This 300 million yuan of profit was indeed a small favor to MN Group. It was not something to be proud of. There was indeed no need for her to cause trouble for herself in exchange for this 15% promotion. CEO Zhang had been in the business world for so many years, but this was the first time he was made a fool of by a 24-year-old girl. In the end, he could not even vent his anger and could only hold it in. He even had to put on a smiling face. Let me take a look at the contract and calculate it. If it's okay, we can discuss it again. CEO Zhang took a step back but did not make a firm promise. Jean Wan placed the contract on the coffee table. Okay, CEO Zhang, take a look first. Once you're sure, call me or inform my assistant. I'll go to the bathroom first. All right. CEO G, please. Jean Wan stood up. Xiao Ba and the other secretaries sat on the sofa without moving. After all, they did not know what Jean Wan was planning today. However, they felt a chill down their spines. They felt like CEO Zhang's wife would come charging at them at any moment. Xiao Ba, bring my bag over, Jean Wan said. Xiao Ba rushed to hand Jean Wan's bag to her. She then watched as Jean Wan calmly entered the bathroom without the slightest hint of nervousness. As soon as the bathroom door closed, there was a sudden commotion outside. Little Eight and a few secretaries sat on the sofa and looked at each other. When Director Zhang heard the commotion outside, he furrowed his brows. He hurriedly got up and opened the door a crack with a guilty look on his face. After taking a look outside, he hurriedly called for the security guard outside and whispered, "The person causing trouble outside is my wife. Don't let her know that I'm here. If she comes looking for me, just tell her that I've just left." The security guard nodded with a confused look on his face. At this time, the noise outside was even louder. CEO Zhang gritted his teeth in anger when he thought of how he had been tricked by Jean Wan today. Originally, he wanted to take advantage of MN Group before they established themselves in Haiqing to gain more profits. In the end, not only did he fail to gain any advantage, but Jean Wan even used this scandal to turn the tables on him. Where's my husband? Didn't someone just take a photo of him flirting with that little vixen surnamed G outside this KTV? Where is he? Get them to scram out here. Mrs. Zhang, who was outside, shouted while holding a cigarette. She rushed in despite the security guard's obstruction. Hearing the powerful voice outside, the two colleagues sitting by Little Eight's side hurriedly huddled together. They moved closer to Little Eight and asked worriedly, "What should we do?" "It seems like they're really fierce." Little Eight turned to look in the direction of the bathroom and whispered, "CEO G should have a way. Let's wait and see first." Although she was also quite nervous, when she thought of how confident her boss was, she felt that there shouldn't be any problems today. Mrs. Zhang continued to shout outside. The security guards kept rushing over to stop her, but who would have thought that Mrs. Zhang actually brought so many people over? Men and women, rough, and those with some skills, none of them could stop her. They could only hear her shouting as she rushed in. "The one surnamed Zhang. Come out here. You dare to chase after a mistress right in front of me? Do you really not take this old lady seriously? You actually dare to come to a place like KTV? Zhang Dahong. Get out here. Mrs. Zhang, don't be agitated. CEO Zhang really isn't here right now. He already left just now. You won't be able to find him even if you come here. CEO Zhang has already, scram. Who the F***ck do you think you are? How dare you lie in front of this old lady? I clearly saw his car parked outside. CEO Zhang drank and left in someone else's car. Mrs. Zhang, don't go in anymore. There are other customers in our KTV rooms. You're really affecting our business. Scram. Mrs. Zhang. I told you to scram. Don't refuse a toast only to drink a forfeit. Scram. Mrs. Zhang, why are you hitting people? Scram. If you don't scram, this old lady will break your legs. The group of security guards outside immediately quietened down. The two colleagues sitting by little 8 side. As expected of a shrew. Looking at CEO Zhang anxiously pacing back and forth in the room, it was clear how afraid he was of his wife. It was no wonder that although he had a lecherous appearance and always glanced at their CEO, he never had the guts to do anything. Today, CEO had seduced his guts out. In the end, he even attracted his wife. Little 8 sister, will someone die? Little 8 did not speak. She lowered her head and was about to take out her phone from her bag. She was considering if she should call the police. If a fight really broke out, it would be good if the police could arrive in time. In the end, she had just rummaged through her bag when she suddenly saw the heat pad she had prepared for Jean Wan. Little 8 immediately felt a flash of inspiration. She seemed to understand Jean Wan's intentions. She did not take out her phone but slowly closed her bag. She then turned to CEO Zhang. CEO Zhang, your wife sounds really impressive. CEO Zhang immediately narrowed his eyes at little 8 in displeasure. He said meaningfully, your CEO is also quite impressive. As he spoke, he even gave her a thumbs up. However, his actions were slightly harsh and he was gritting his teeth. It was clear that he was extremely angry and anxious. Little 8 narrowed her eyes and smiled. She did not speak further. Zhang Dahong. If you don't scram out, this old lady will burn down your company. Come out. Chapter 470. Right now, the only place he could hide was the restroom. However, the restroom was occupied by Jean Wan. A loud knocking sound suddenly came from the private room's door. The knocking was heavy and fierce, causing one's heart to flutter. Come out. Scram out here for this old lady. The private room's door was slammed open at this moment. CEO Zhang's 1.8 meters tall and fat body could not help but tremble. Mrs. Zhang rushed in. She was also very fat, around 1.7 meters tall. Among women, she could be considered very strong. With one look, it was clear that she was not someone to be bullied. When Mrs. Zhang saw CEO Zhang, she rushed up and grabbed his ear while scolding. You're really bold. You really have guts, aw. You actually dare to fool around with other women outside. Where's that vixen called Jean Wan? Didn't she come with you? Didn't you flirt outside the KTV? Where is she? Did she really turn into a vixen and disappear? When Xiao Ba heard these words, she immediately stood up from the sofa. Mrs. Zhang, please watch your mouth. Our CEO is here today to discuss a collaboration with CEO Zhang. If you know about CEO Zhang, you should know that Minghai Company has recently partnered with our MN Group on a new project. We're currently discussing how to split the profits. The contract is still here. Mrs. Zhang immediately glared fiercely at Xiao Wan. Seeing a young lady like her, she narrowed her eyes in anger. Who are you? I'm CEO's assistant. Assistant. Mrs. Zhang abruptly twisted CEO Zhang's ear harshly. Not bad, even a lousy assistant of that vixen dares to speak to this old lady with such an attitude. Speak, how many times have you slept with her? You even dare to touch the dirt on my head. Be gentler. Gentler. CEO Zhang's ear was twisted. His tall and fat figure was pushed onto the sofa by Mrs. Zhang. He spoke helplessly and evasively, "CEOG, and I really aren't like what you think. It's all a misunderstanding. I already explained it to you at home yesterday. At that time, CEOG handed me a toothpick in that photo. It's not like you don't know that I always get my teeth stuck when I eat." Not only did Mrs. Zhang not let go, but she almost twisted his ear off. "I've been with you for most of my life. Do you think I don't know what kind of person you are? You think that the vixen is pretty. Why don't you ask someone to pass you a toothpick? Fine, if you say that the photo isn't evidence, then what about the photo of you laughing with that vixen in front of the KTV? The news and photos had just been released, and they hadn't even warmed up yet. In the blink of an eye, the two of you were together in the KTV downstairs. If there was really nothing going on, shouldn't the two of you be avoiding each other? Why are they gathering together even more arrogantly? Aren't we talking about cooperation? The contract is right here. Take a look at it yourself." "What am I looking at?" Casually placing a few pieces of paper here, and you're talking about cooperation. Why don't you just place the divorce agreement with me here so that the vixen's surname G can sleep with you without worry? How would I dare to divorce? I don't dare. CEO Zhang smiled apologetically. He raised his hand and waved it off, but because of the pain in his ear, his entire face turned pale. Xiao Ba muttered in her heart, "This CEO Zhang looks tall and strong, and he's usually very impressive in the circle. I didn't expect him to be so cowardly in front of his wife. Where did that vixen go?" As Mrs. Zhang spoke, she turned to look at Xiao Ba and the others. Seeing that they were completely unable to show their faces in public, she did not vent her anger on them. At this moment, the sound of the toilet flushing could be heard from the bathroom. Mrs. Zhang immediately turned to look at the bathroom door. She abruptly released CEO Zhang's ear and turned to grab an unopened bottle of beer from the coffee table. She smashed it harshly against the coffee table, shattering the bottle in half and causing the beer to splash out. She raised the sharp bottle and rushed to the bathroom door, scolding, "Little vixen, let's see where else you can hide. If this old lady doesn't scrape your face today, my surname isn't." Before she finished speaking, the door of the bathroom in front of her was suddenly pushed open from the inside out. Because Mrs. Zhang was standing too close, she was forced to take 2 steps back. When she raised the bottle of beer to face Jean Wan was holding her bag in one hand and a small pack of tampons in the other. Seeing Mrs. Zhang, she asked in surprise, "Earlier, I heard the commotion from inside. Are you Mrs. Zhang?" Mrs. Zhang saw that Jean Wan was able to remain calm even after hearing the commotion and immediately scolded, "So, how dare you seduce my husband? Tell me, how many times have you slept with him? Where are you planning to go to sleep today?" The corners of Jean Wan's eyes twitched slightly. She glanced at the beer bottle in Mrs. Zhang's hand and smiled. "Mrs. Zhang, you've misunderstood. CEO Zhang and I are indeed here to discuss the contract. If not, why would I bring so many secretaries and assistants here? If there's any misunderstanding, let's sit down and talk. This is a lawful society. There's no need to fight and kill. To deal with shameless vixens like you, there's no need to be too polite." Mrs. Zhang saw that Jean Wan's aura was so calm and did not show the slightest bit of panic as a mistress. She could not help but calm down as well. She was not in a rush to do anything to her. She held the beer bottle in one hand and placed the other on her waist. With a heavy puff of smoke, she scolded, "Don't think that just because I don't know how to do business, I can't tell what the two of you are doing here. What contract? Did you think you could hide it from everyone by calling a small assistant over? Otherwise, What does Mrs. Zhang think we usually do when we come out to discuss business, eat, drink, and socialize? Jean Wan retorted. Mrs. Zhang was stunned for a moment. It was clear that she had never come out to do business before. She glanced at Jean Wan's beautiful smile and then at Jean Wan's figure. She was so angry that she suddenly turned to glare harshly at CEO Zhang, who had already walked over but did not dare to make a sound. This kind of woman is very pleasurable to sleep with, isn't it? There's nothing between me and CEO G. There's nothing between us. CEO Zhang furrowed his brows as he explained. Mrs. Zhang. Jean Wan gently raised the small pack of tampons in her hand. Without any evidence, you insist that I have an affair with your husband. You're the one in the wrong. Besides, I'm on my period today. It seems like there's nothing else I can do apart from discussing the cooperation. Hearing the words period, Mrs. Zhang looked toward the tampons in Jean Wan's hand with confusion. Chapter 471. Mrs. Zhang's expression was ugly as she glanced at her. She looked her up and down. She saw that Jean Wan's clothes were neat, and her hair was not messy at all. Furthermore, she did not smell of alcohol at all. She then glanced at the secretaries and assistants near the sofa, as well as the contract on the coffee table. Afterward, she reluctantly entered the bathroom and came out after a while. Jean Wan raised her brows and watched Mrs. Zhang's expression, which had already softened. Jean Wan raised her brows and watched her expression that had softened. It's indeed not good to talk about my period in front of a man. Besides, it's a taboo for men, especially for businessmen. Seeing blood on the bed is a big taboo for businessmen. I don't know if your CEO Zhang will mind this, but as a businessman, I do. Tell me, in my current situation, how could I possibly have that kind of relationship with CEO Zhang? Jean Wan raised her brows and looked at her. Then you've never slept together before. Mrs. Zhang glared at her unforgivingly. To catch a person, you have to catch them dirty. To catch adultery, you have to do it on the bed. The photo of us at the dinner table was taken by someone maliciously. Besides, at that time, CEO Zhang and I did not even touch each other's hands. If you take a closer look at the photo, you'll be able to tell the truth. You've been in this circle for a long time, so you should know that people in both the business and political worlds are not so simple. It's common for people to use underhanded means against someone they don't like. Mrs. Zhang, you should have heard of many disasters caused by such groundless photos. As Jean Wan spoke, she placed the small packet of tampons back into her bag. She then said, as for today, I don't care where you heard the rumors, but since you've come and seen it for yourself, there's nothing between CEO Zhang and CEO Zhang. There's nothing going on between us. If there really is something between us, and we insist on meeting at such a time, I shouldn't have chosen to meet on my period. Mrs. Zhang, you should understand what I mean. Mrs. Zhang listened to her words, but her expression was still somewhat ugly. Who knows if the two of you are messing with me? People like you are too smart. Otherwise, you wouldn't have. I advise Mrs. Zhang to be more rational. Even if you want to catch a mistress, you have to look at the cause and effect. CEO Zhang is indeed a good man, but I don't think I'm at the stage where I need to be CEO Zhang's mistress. I've only just returned to the country and am still unfamiliar with Hai Cheng's business and upper class. Usually, if a CEO asks me to help pass him a toothpick, I wouldn't have any reason to refuse. Furthermore, we're here to discuss a collaboration, and we've even chosen to meet downstairs of our company. With such a close distance, unless you're looking at it with a perverted eye, no matter how you look at it, this looks like an open and above-board business discussion. The security guard outside also came in. Hearing Jean Wan's words, he rushed to agree. That's right, Mrs. Zhang. CEO often chooses our KTV to discuss business with other people in her company because our KTV is newly opened. The environment is good, the space is large, and the soundproofing is good. It won't be too noisy. Furthermore, our place is very clean and close to CEO G's company. Not only did she come here with CEO Zhang, a few days ago, the wives of some of the company's CEO also came with them. We really don't have any messy matters here. There isn't even a guest room upstairs. It's impossible for something like what you're thinking to happen. Mrs. Zhang's expression was slightly embarrassed. At this moment, Xiao Ba came over and took out a heat pack from her bag. CEO G, this is the heat pack you requested. You came out to discuss business with a stomach ache during your period, yet you encountered such a thing. I'm guessing your stomach is still feeling unwell, right? Hearing this, Mrs. Zhang glanced at Jin Wan. Indeed, her face was slightly pale. Jin Wan did not put on any makeup, nor did she put on any powder, so it was easy to see that she was slightly pale. She was most likely feeling unwell due to her period. By the side, CEO Zhang squeezed out a smile. I really didn't expect CEO G to be so professional. Even if you're feeling unwell, you still personally came to discuss the contract. I'll sign the 25% you mentioned earlier. Don't waste your time. The reason he was willing to sign the contract was naturally because his wife was here. Even if he wanted to put on an act, he had to put on a good show. Otherwise, he would still be in trouble when he returned home. Xiao Ba and the rest did not expect CEO Zhang to agree so readily. While secretly rejoicing, they secretly glanced at Jin Wan. However, they saw that Jin Wan remained calm and quiet with a smile. Then I'll have to thank CEO Zhang. It's also my fault for causing your wife to misunderstand and almost cause disharmony in your family. It's a good thing that we have the chance to clear things up here. I believe that someone as reasonable as Mrs. Zhang will definitely not misunderstand anything because of something that doesn't exist. Right now, in this business world, there are many women. Usually, when you go out, you have to face all sorts of people, both men and women. I advise Mrs. Zhang not to just listen to the wind. Everything has to be based on evidence. Mrs. Zhang kept a straight face and did not speak further. However, she was clearly unhappy and felt that she had lost face. When Jin Wan turned to return to the sofa, CEO Zhang intentionally walked over with a smile in order to show that he was truly here to discuss the contract. He maintained a polite smile as though he was discussing business. CEO G, let me take a look at the contract. I'll sign it. CEO Zhang has really agreed. After all, there's still a difference of 300 million. Jin Wan handed the contract to him and purposely asked. I've thought about it earlier. Our Minghai Company and MN Group still have a long way to go. We have to confirm this project first. If we continue to delay it, it won't be beneficial to either party. This 25% is indeed reasonable. Mrs. Zhang did not understand what they were talking about. She only leaned over to take a look at the contract in CEO Zhang's hands. It really was a project agreement with MN Group. She stood behind CEO Zhang and said with a threatening expression, I'll wait for you outside. Hurry up and come out. All right. I'll go out immediately after signing it. CEO Zhang's expression was serious as though business was the most important thing. Mrs. Zhang finally rolled her eyes. She no longer looked at Jin Wan and the others in the private room. She turned and led her people away. Finally, the door to the private room was closed. Mrs. Zhang thought for a moment and pressed her ear against the door to eavesdrop. As CEO Zhang signed the contract, he raised his eyes to look at Jin Wan, whose expression was normal. He guessed that his wife was eavesdropping outside the door, so he did not say anything. After signing the contract, he raised his hand and gave Jean Wan a thumbs up, mouthing, "You're awesome." Chapter 472. CEO Zhang watched in displeasure as she held on to the contract worth 300 million yuan. His heart ached as though he had cut off a piece of flesh. He really did not expect that despite her young age, this woman was so good at psychological warfare. Jean Wan was so young. He didn't say more. He put away his briefcase and turned to leave. His expression was very ugly. When he left the private room and saw that his wife was still outside, he immediately put on a smiling face and didn't dare to show his anger at all. In the private room, Jean Wan gently flicked her fingers on the contract. She curved her lips and casually tossed the contract to Xiao Ba. "Keep it." The next day, a roll of surveillance footage from the KTV near MN Group was sent to the computers of various media outlets. Overnight, all the unrelated rumors about Jean Wan and CEO Zhang were deleted. Not to mention photos, not even a single insulting word was left. Jean Wan was very busy these days. Although the scandal last time didn't affect her much, the news of her returning to the country with MN Group, which belonged to the business circle, spread like wildfire and was widely spread. In fact, many rich people at home and abroad didn't participate in things like the Forbes ranking, nor would they disclose the amount of assets under their names. Relatively speaking, low-key people were still in the minority. When she was in London, Mr. Zand helped her manage everything. In order to help the development and reputation of MN Group, he took the initiative to report the strength of MN Group in all aspects, so Jean Wan was selected as one of the world's entrepreneurs by Forbes. This kind of ranking was actually just a gimmick. She didn't care about it and even felt it was a bit of a burden. However, as the #1 female entrepreneur under the age of 25, high cities' TV stations and reporters took turns to wait outside MN Group just to interview her. Later, to avoid being pestered like this, Xiao Ba asked the TV station to arrange an interview for her. Jean Wan personally went to the TV station to record the interview. After the interview, it caused a huge response, causing Jean Wan's reputation to soar. Every day, she was pestered by the media to no end. After enduring for more than 10 days, finally, the media's popularity gradually decreased, and her life gradually returned to normal. She no longer had to be chased by reporters and even followed to her home every day. After being busy for so many days, the weekend was finally approaching. All of a sudden, a special invitation was sent to Jean Wan's desk. In the afternoon, when Jean Wan returned to her office, she saw the envelope on the table. She opened it and took a look. It was a golden invitation. "What's this?" she asked, opening it. Xiao Ba said, "It's from the Ling Xiao Group. It said that it's their old chairman, Mr. Xiao Xinjuan's 50th birthday. They'll invite all the major public figures and celebrities in the country to attend the birthday banquet. The Xiao family has always had business dealings with the major companies in High City, so they plan to hold the birthday banquet in High City. They've even specially invited you, special invitation." Jean Wan didn't remember that she had any contact with the people of Ling Xiao Group, nor did she have any contact with the Xiao family. If she did have any contact with them, it was probably when she was locked up in the mountain villa by Xiao Li 3 years ago, but then she went to England and had never contacted China, let alone had any contact with them. Even if he invited all the big shots and public figures of Sea City to attend the birthday banquet, it would only be an invitation. How could it be a special invitation? Jean Wan opened the invitation and took a look at it. It was indeed written with the words "special invitation." By the way, the person who just sent the invitation said that CEO Xiao intends to invite you to the birthday banquet as his female companion. If you have any questions, you can call CEO Xiao. Xiao Bot pointed to a black corner that was pressed by a stack of documents. That's CEO Zhao's business card. I almost forgot about it. Jin Wan pulled out the black business card from under the document and saw Xiao Lui's name on it. Although Ling Xiao Group and the Xiao family's old house were not in High City, they were located in Lin City, which was very close to High City. For many years, Ling Xiao Group had been a heavyweight in the business circle. It was said that Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan, the chairman of Ling Xiao Group, had connections with the four big families of High City when he was young. Jin Wan forgot where she had heard it. Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan had a very good relationship with her father Ji Hongwen when he was young, but as long as she could remember, she had never seen this man surnamed Xiao appear in the Ji family. Later, she vaguely heard some things about Ji Hongwen when he was young. At that time, she was still young and didn't pay much attention to it, so she didn't have much impression of this Xiao family. Later, when she learned about the Xiao family, she only knew that the current leader of the Xiao family was the third generation of the Communist Party. The whole family had been working for the big leaders of the country since decades ago, and even some uncles and nephews of the Xiao family held high military ranks in the country's military. It was a family that spanned the three realms of business, politics, and military, and was almost as famous as the Mo family in the country. In the early years, the Mo family also had these relationships with the leaders of the government. Later, as the Mo family withdrew from the disputes of the government and saw through the advantages and the relative dangers of being involved in the military and politics, the Mo family began to be very low-key and focused on business. In order to avoid arousing suspicion in the country, the Mo family moved the foundation of the family business to the United States. It could be said that they had made a lot of preparations and did not completely take root in the country. Therefore, although the Mo family now seemed to have an invincible position in the business circle, in fact, for many seniors in the domestic business circle, the Mo family and the Xiao family were unusual existences and ancestors who could never be provoked. Holding the business card, Jin Wan recalled the days when she was trapped in the villa on the mountain 3 years ago. Although nothing happened afterward, she had never figured out why Xiao Lui left her in the villa for so many days without doing anything to her or hurting her. What did he mean by that? There must be something wrong, but later, Xiao Lui didn't do anything at all. Except for the uproar caused by him in High City 2 years ago in order to steal Shi Nianj from Qin Siding, she never heard anything about him again. In fact, Xiao Lui had always been a very low-key and mysterious person. The Xiao family was so prosperous in the country, and the Ling Xiao Group was also an unshakable enterprise in the Chinese world, but he rarely showed up in person. She felt it was strange 3 years ago, and now this invitation letter came even more inexplicably. Did she provoke the Xiao family? No. He specially invited her to be his female companion. What was his plan? Instead of stealing a woman from Qin Siding, he invited her to be his female companion. Chapter 473. 2 days later, on Sunday. Jin Wan got up early, took a shower at home, and prepared for the birthday party in the evening. Tonight, not only was she the president of MN Group, but she was also the female companion of President Xiao of Ling Xiao Group. Therefore, she picked out a red dress that she liked to wear after going to England, put on a more suitable dress, and went out. When she arrived at the appointed place, she saw a stretch car parked in the distance. Obviously, Xiao Lui had been here for a while and had been waiting for her outside. Jin Wan went over and knocked on the window. When the window rolled down, the man inside took a sideways glance at her. Seeing Jin Wan in a red dress and smiling, he raised his eyebrows. "Miss Ji, I haven't seen you for 3 years. You've become more and more beautiful." Xiao Lui got out of the car. Dressed in a well-ironed suit, he was still as arrogant as before. When he saw Jin Wan's coat, he said with a smile, "I just invited you to my father's birthday party." Although the room is air-conditioned, it's still summer, so it won't be too cold. Why are you wearing a coat? It's a dress I chose at the last minute. My shoulders are too exposed, so it's not suitable for this occasion. I'll look more conservative and dignified with a coat, so as not to embarrass you, CEO Xiao. The others saw that the man and the woman seemed to be smiling and talking to each other, but only Xiao Lui and Jin Wan could feel that there was not much warmth in each other's eyes. Instead, they seemed to be sizing each other up and down. Xiao Lui didn't say more and casually opened the door behind him. Please, Miss Ji. Jin Wan didn't get in the car. She just glanced at the car and then turned her eyes to Xiao Lui in a suit. Although I'm here, I have nothing to say. After all, your father, Mr. Xiao, is a well-known elder in High City. I should go to celebrate his birthday, but before I go to the birthday party, I still have to ask, why do you want me to be your female companion? Xiao Lui glanced at her again, and his cold eyes fell on her eyes. Have you ever wondered why I took you away, didn't touch you at all, and asked Mo Jingshan to take you back? Jin Wan, no. Xiao Lui, he casually put one hand on the car door, and his fingers casually tapped on the car door. He looked at her face and said, you are really open-minded. Jin Wan smiled disapprovingly. Although I did suspect it, why would I deliberately think about this kind of thing? There are a lot of lunatics in this world, and there are also a lot of perverts. If I had to think of a reason for every single person with a mental problem, I would probably die of exhaustion long ago. Xiao Lui smiled coldly. Then don't ask. If you have the guts, get in the car. If not, drive your own car. It's not a problem for me to drive myself, but I'm afraid that President Xiao must have been tortured quite a bit by Miss Shi over the past few years. He seems rather cold and distant, no longer as gentlemanly as he was 3 years ago. Jin Wan smiled, her eyes slightly curved. How is it? In the end, your rabbit still didn't obediently enter your cage. Are you very angry? As she wished, Xiao Lui smiled coldly at her, but his smile made her feel as if she had fallen into an ice cave. Little girl, if you weren't related to me, your blood would have been spilled on the spot. How dare you poke me with words? Who gave you the guts to do so? Is it Mo Jingshan? As far as I know, haven't you two been divorced for a long time? Jin Wan didn't answer this question, as if the Mo Jingshan he mentioned had nothing to do with her. She just glanced at her car that had just parked not far away. I'll drive myself. I don't want to bother CEO Xiao. I'll attend the birthday party, but I'd better forget about being your female companion. I don't want to be the female companion of a man who emits cold air. I'm afraid I'll freeze to death before I get there. I'm not related to you. I don't need to make myself suffer. Seeing her turn to leave his car, Xiao Lui frowned and turned to look at her. Come back. Jin Wan stopped and turned to look at him. CEO Xiao, can you change your attitude? Is this the attitude you should have toward your female companion? Xiao Lui opened the car door again. Get in. Jin Wan didn't move but tilted her head and looked at him as if sizing him up. Miss Ji, please get in the car. He glanced at her coldly again and said, please. Tut, it seemed that she had to go tonight. What kind of birthday party was it? Why did she, who had nothing to do with the Xiao family, have to go? Even a person like Xiao Lui could compromise for once. Jin Wan turned and walked back. Before getting in the car, she glanced at the man beside her. Thank you, CEO Xiao. Sorry to trouble you, but I want to say that you can call me CEO Ji or Jin Wan. I'm not a little girl. Don't call me that. If you don't know me, you might think I've adopted a godbrother. Hearing the word brother, Xiao Lui suddenly said meaningfully, really? Then one day in the future, you may be surprised. Jean Wan had already sat in the car. She didn't hear him clearly just now, so she poked her head out to look at him. What do you mean by surprised? Xiao Lui didn't get it. He sneered and slammed the door shut with a bang. Fortunately, Jean Wan stepped back quickly. Otherwise, her head would have been smashed by the door. The Xiao family's birthday party was held on a luxury cruise ship. Although Jean Wan had been in the upper class since she was a child, she rarely attended such an extravagant party. After getting out of the car, she saw the huge cruise ship parked near Hai City's Binhai Bay. Jean Wan commented, "Very classy." Xiao Lui stretched out his arm to her and said, "Of course. How dare I invite Miss Ji to an ordinary party?" Jean Wan glanced at his arm. "Even if I'm your female companion, you don't have to hold my hand and go in." Xiao Lui. "Didn't you tell me to be gentlemanly to you? Just be gentlemanly in attitude. You'd better keep your distance. After all, we don't know each other that well." With that, Jean Wan took out her invitation from her bag and walked inside. First, she needed to get in the car with the invitation and ID card, and then take a special car to the Bay Pier. The car drove straight from the pier to the cruise ship. Looking at the size of the cruise ship, Jean Wan sighed at the Xiao family's extravagance. The car smoothly arrived at the cruise ship's parking lot. Jean Wan and Xiao Lui got out of the car. After all, as his female companion, even if she didn't have to hold his arm, she had to walk closer to him. Xiao Lui was one of the hosts tonight. After getting on the cruise ship, she didn't need to take out her invitation. She just needed to follow Xiao Lui to enter the banquet hall. Many people had gathered in the luxurious banquet hall, and it was very lively. She then glanced at the French fries on the long table and the ketchup on the plate. She pondered for a moment and called the waiter over, asking for a pair of scissors and several small golden pins. About 15 minutes later, Jean Wan put on the shoes that no longer rubbed her feet and came out. She was still radiant and unaffected. In the distance, Ji Mengrand glanced in the direction of the locker room from time to time. She saw that Jean Wan's red dress had been rolled up to her waist and decorated with several small golden pins. Not only did it successfully cover the ketchup on her dress, but it also turned the single-layered dress into a double-layered, fluffy skirt. The skirt was only about 2 centimeters above her knees, and her fair, straight, long legs were exposed. Wearing a matching pair of high heels, Jean Wan instantly changed from an elegant lady in a long dress to a slightly pretty and sexy beauty in a short skirt. Those small golden pins seemed to be a special design and didn't look out of place at all. When the people near the locker room suddenly saw Jean Wan come out like this, many men couldn't help glancing in her direction. Jean Wan had taken off her coat, and the sexy but not too revealing red dress exposed her fair and seductive shoulders, collarbone, and long legs. Seeing this scene, Ji Mengrand immediately looked away, as if nothing had happened. However, she was secretly unhappy in her heart. Why was Jean Wan as ostentatious as before she got married? Even Xing Yihan could feel the change in Jean Wan now. The point was that she was more ostentatious than before. The 24-year-old Jean Wan was different from the first socialite of High City in her teens before she got married. At that time, Jean Wan was a proud peacock, but now Jean Wan was a combination of sexiness and maturity, unabashedly showing off all her beauty and appearing more unrestrained than before. And this attracted more men's attention. After walking through the crowd, Jean Wan didn't plan to look for Xiao Lui. Anyway, when she came out just now, she saw Xiao Lui go to the back, probably to meet the star of tonight, his father, Mr. Xiao. Seeing Jean Wan didn't have a male companion, some men who had met or cooperated with Jean Wan some time ago came up to greet her. From time to time, a man struck up a conversation and asked, "CEOG, did you come alone? Don't you have a male companion?" Jean smiled and didn't answer. She just took a glass of red wine handed to her by the man, clinked glasses with him, took a sip, and said with a smile, "I have a male companion, but I guess this place is too big and we got separated." "Is CEOG's male companion your boyfriend or someone else? You were alone the last time I saw you. I wonder if CEOG has a boyfriend or is he married?" The man then said politely, "I don't know if it's too abrupt to ask this." "No, it's not abrupt." Jean took another sip of red wine and saw a familiar slender black figure who had just received a glass of wine not far away. She smiled and said to the men next to her, "I'm married, but my ex-husband died." Under the shocked gazes of the group, she gently shook the red wine glass in her hand and continued in a voice that could be heard by the people around her, 3 years ago, after attending his funeral, I went straight to England. Ha, CEOG really likes to joke. CEOG, you can't make such a joke. These people all thought she was joking. Chapter 475. Jean walked through the crowd. Because of the ketchup, her short skirt had to be changed. Although it was no longer dignified and elegant, it was beautiful with her pretty eyes and brows. Over the years, she had always known how to show her beauty to the extreme. The more someone wanted to play tricks on her, the more confident and elegant she would be. Jean watched from the side. As soon as Jean appeared in the crowd, almost all the men's eyes turned to her. Jean didn't walk with her male companion, so everyone scrambled to be her companion. However, while the women in the field saw such an enviable Jean, the men saw a noble and languid woman who just passed by a group of men, said hello to them with a smile, and completely ignored the admiration in their eyes. She wore a red skirt, her skin was fair, and her face was as beautiful as peach and plum, but her eyes were as cold as frost, and no one could really approach her. Xiao Li thought that when he came out again, he would see a little woman who was lost and looking for him everywhere, but when he came out, he saw Jean smiling confidently with everyone. He thoughtfully looked at the woman who seemed to have grown a lot in the past 3 years. After staring at her for a moment, he walked over and said, "My dear female companion, how do you feel after strolling here alone for a long time?" "Not much. I almost forgot your existence, CEO Xiao." Jean turned back and smiled at him. Obviously, she didn't care whether he was there or not. Xiao Li didn't talk nonsense with her and said seriously, "My father wants to see you. Come with me." CEO Xiao's father. Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan, who was celebrating his 50th birthday today. He wanted to see her. Jean did not speak, but her eyes blinked twice, clearly asking why. He invited Miss G here so blatantly. He can't kidnap you to kill and dismember you. Besides, there are surveillance cameras all around. You don't need to worry about your safety. Jean thought for a moment. Of course, she didn't worry about her safety. She just didn't know what the Xiao family meant. Xiao Lui was hard to figure out. What kind of person was his father? Please. Xiao Lui made a very gentlemanly gesture. Jean didn't say anything more. Since the chairman of Ling Xiao Group invited her, she had no reason to refuse. After all, this was a large domestic company. No matter how powerful MN Group was, it couldn't easily compete with Ling Xiao Group. When he and Xiao Lui were about to walk in the direction he said, they suddenly passed by a quiet place where people were drinking wine. Xiao Lui stopped, looked back at the person beside him and said with a smile, "CEOMO, it's such a beautiful night. Have a good time." Jean turned around to see the man's handsome face that caused one's hair to stand on end. The black shirt wrapped around the man's slender and straight legs and the perfect lines of his body. It was so exquisite that there was not a single crease on it, causing countless women to be captivated. He raised his eyelids, glanced at them indifferently, and finally rested his eyes on Jinwan's face. His eyes were as calm as ever, as if Jinwan had never said he was dead. His handsome face was also calm, but his eyes were deep. He stood there indifferently and said in a low and clear voice, "It doesn't matter whether I'm happy or not, but I'm afraid the person CEO Xiao is taking her to see won't make her very happy." Jinwan raised her eyebrows. Was Imo Jingshan a fortune teller? How did he know that Xiao Lui was taking her to see someone? Why did she feel that he seemed to know why Xiao Lui invited her here tonight? Just like 3 years ago, Mo Jingshan clearly knew Xiao Lui's background very well. Seeing Jinwan pondering, Xiao Lui just smiled and looked back at her. "Miss Ji, don't tell me you don't dare to go in. It's just to see my father." Jinwan didn't speak, nor did she look at the two men again, but walked in. She didn't stop until she reached the door of the lounge. "Although I'm not a narcissistic person, I don't think Mr. Xiao will be so senile as to want to see me and ask me to be his daughter-in-law, will he?" Jinwan suddenly blurted out after thinking a lot about Imo Jingshan's words. Xiao Lui didn't expect that she would walk so fast just now. As soon as he walked behind her, he heard her words and sneered coldly. "Even if he's really senile, I'm afraid I won't marry you." "That's true. After all, CEO Xiao has been pursuing Miss Shi for so many years. It can be seen how stubborn you are about this rabbit that you haven't got yet. It's just an excuse that you said you'd catch another rabbit. You're not interested in other women at all." Jinwan gave him a meaningful look. Hearing her mention Shi Nianj, the smile on Xiao Lui's face was not so sincere. He looked at her with a fake smile. "I advise you not to meddle in other people's business." "I'm not meddling in other people's business. I just like to poke at other people's sore spots." Jinwan winked at him with a smile. Xiao Lui squinted at her and suddenly said indifferently before opening the door, "Even if I'm willing to marry you, I'm afraid I won't allow it in ethics." "You're really thinking too highly of yourself." Jinwan took another look at him. What did this have to do with ethics? The door had been pushed open. When she turned her eyes again, she saw that the lounge was quiet. Only a few staff members were accompanying Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan inside. There were a lot of bouquets in the lounge, which should be all kinds of birthday flowers sent in advance by the people who came to celebrate his birthday. Hearing the sound of the door, old Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan suddenly turned his eyes. Although the 50-year-old man was already half a century old, he was handsome. Judging from his temperament and figure, he seemed to be in his 40s. It could also be seen that although old Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan was old, he should often exercise and pay attention to health. Although he was about the same age as her father, Ji Hongwen, his health was obviously better. "You're here." "Hello, Mr. Xiao, I'm Jinwan." Mr. Xiao looked at her for a moment, then at Jinwan's dress, and suddenly smiled. "The design is good. Did you change it yourself?" Jinwan didn't hide it and said frankly, "I accidentally dirted my dress in the fitting room just now, so I changed the hemline temporarily. I hope this kind of careless behavior is not too unsightly in front of you, Mr. Xiao." "How could that be? Miss Ji is young and beautiful. You are calm when you encounter problems. From the moment you stepped onto this cruise ship, I have been paying attention to you. I can see that Miss Ji is a very outstanding girl." Xiao Zhenjuan said as he narrowed his eyes to look at her, as if he was looking at someone else through her. Because of his words, the polite smile on Jinwan's face gradually faded. Chapter 476. It wasn't until Jean Wan saw the surveillance screens of the banquet hall above the lounge that she realized why he said he had been watching her. So she had been watched since she came in. Seeing Jean Wan didn't look so good, Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan said, "Miss Ji, don't get me wrong. My son rarely brings a female companion to the banquet. Because you are his female companion, I paid too much attention to you." Hearing this reason, Jean Wan's expression softened. "Oh, is that so?" Although it sounded normal for an old father to pay attention to his son's female companion, Jean Wan clearly remembered that the person who invited her was not only Xiao Lui but also Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan. Besides, Xiao Lui was obviously just joking with her and had never been really interested in her. Since he was not interested in her, he wouldn't let his father misunderstand her, let alone let her come in to see his father. So what was the reason? She was afraid it was not so simple. She didn't speak out her doubts but just looked at Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan with a smile. "Mr. Xiao, since you pay so much attention to CEO Xiao's female companion, it seems that you want CEO Xiao to get married and start a family as soon as possible." With that, she turned her eyes to Xiao Lui. "CEO Xiao is over 30, isn't he? He hasn't gotten married yet. It's really worrying for him to be single. I know a lot of rich ladies in High City. Do you need me to introduce some to you?" She suddenly changed the topic to him. Xiao Lui gave her a warning look. "Thank you, but I don't need it." Jean Wan gave a faint smile and was about to say something, when Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan suddenly said with a smile, "Miss Ji, it's true that you know a lot of rich ladies in High City. After all, you are the eldest daughter of the Ji family, born and raised in High City. In my opinion, your plan is really good. When you have time, introduce a few more girls to my son, so that he won't be so stubborn to marry a crooked tree, which doesn't belong to him at all." Xiao Lui's face darkened. "Old Xiao, what's the difference between getting married and not getting married? You sound as if you've been very quiet since you got married. In the end, you changed a lot after more than 20 years, didn't you? It's rare for me to see it with my own eyes, so I advise you to restrain yourself. Don't use my marriage for everything." Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan immediately glanced at him coldly, but Xiao Lui didn't look at him. His words clearly indicated that he didn't overdo it. Jean Wan felt that her IQ had dropped to 0 the moment she'd entered this room. He couldn't understand the conversation between the father and son at all. But seeing that the two of them were arguing with each other, as an outsider, she simply didn't participate. She turned to look at the expensive birthday flowers placed around her, as well as all kinds of evergreen trees and other potted plants. Miss Ji likes flowers. Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan's voice suddenly said to her, "Take whichever you like. Flowers are not suitable for an old man like me. It's more suitable for young girls like you. If you like it, just take it." "No, I just didn't want to disturb your chat with CEO Xiao, so I just looked around casually," Jean Wan said politely. Seeing her so distant and polite, Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan looked at her for a while and smiled. "It's our fault. We completely regarded Miss Ji as one of our own and quarreled with you in front of you. We are like this at home and don't give in to each other. Our home is so quiet as if we have no relatives. It's rare for us to get together, and we always discuss the company's affairs or quarrel over his marriage." I'm really sorry that you've seen this kind of family affair." Jean Wan didn't understand why Mr. Xiao, who was rumored to be mysterious and could never be offended in the business circle, would say so much to her, and it wasn't because she was the president of MN Group. Although he sounded polite, she felt that he seemed to have something else in his words, but he didn't say it clearly. "It doesn't matter. I've always let things go in one ear and out the other. I can't remember anything, and I won't tell others about these things." Jean Wan smiled faintly, and her eyes were calm. Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan looked at her for a while and then said, "Today is my 50th birthday. Although it's very lively, I haven't had a close friend to talk to for many years. Miss G, I like you very much. When the birthday party is over, would you like to stay for dinner with me? Mr. Xiao, you're too polite. Our MN group has never interacted with your group before. It's an honor to be invited today. Tonight's banquet is so luxurious, and there are so many people here. I guess the banquet won't end until midnight. My stomach isn't very good, and it's not suitable for me to eat at night, so I'd better forget about staying for dinner. If we have the opportunity to cooperate with your group, I'll definitely make time to have a good meal with Chairman Xiao and President Xiao, but I don't eat much, and I'm not a good drinker, so please excuse me. Jean Wan said as she picked up her cell phone and looked at the time. It's getting late. Mr. Xiao is the star of tonight's banquet. Why don't you go out to celebrate with everyone? Seeing Jean Wan's refusal was so obvious, Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan looked at her and said with a smile, okay, we'll definitely have a chance to cooperate with MN Group in the near future. We still have a long way to go. When Xiao Li finally came out of the lounge, he saw that Jean Wan looked as usual. Although she was suspicious, she didn't seem to want to ask anything. He looked at her. Don't you have any questions? Jean Wan paused and turned to carefully observe the expression on Xiao Li's face. What are you looking at? Xiao Li seemed to feel uncomfortable being stared at by her and glanced at her with cold eyebrows. I'm thinking maybe I misunderstood things just now, Jean Wan said lightly. I don't think your father is in a hurry to find a wife for you, nor does he want to force me to marry you. Xiao Li, nonsense. He just wants to find you a stepmother, doesn't he? Xiao Li, Jean Wan raised her hand and touched her face with a distressed expression. I admit that I'm slightly good-looking, but I don't think I've reached the point where I can win over both young and old. Your father wants to send me flowers, invite me to dinner, and even tell me that he needs a confidant to chat with. Does he want to marry me and make me your stepmother? Xiao Li, Jean Wan saw that Xiao Li's face was almost green as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. She looked at him with a bright smile and asked, Hey, CEO Xiao, do you lack maternal love? Chapter 477. Although Jean Wan made it sound easy, after leaving the break room, what she really thought about was not this. Mo Jingshan would never do meaningless things, much less speak meaningless nonsense. There must be something wrong with what he asked Xiao Li just now. That Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan was very polite to her and seemed to treat her very well. He seemed to want to get close to her, which contradicted what Mo Jingshan said about making her unhappy. Why would an old man who was very kind to her make her unhappy? She had never met Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan before, and there was no conflict between them. Why would he make her unhappy? After thinking about it, she thought of what Xiao Li said about ethics and morality. Her eyelids twitched and she seemed to have thought of something, but she walked quickly back to the banquet hall with a straight face and didn't say a word to Xiao Li again. She was probably thinking too much. When Mr. Xiao came out of the lounge, the banquet hall of the cruise ship was very lively. Mr. Xiao didn't come to see Jean Wan again. Although Xiao Li was by her side as her male companion, he didn't participate in the various celebrations at the banquet. Whenever a man came to strike up a conversation with her, he would drive him away with his eyes and didn't give Jean Wan any chance to chat with other men. Although this made Jean Wan feel relaxed, she couldn't relax because of the idea that suddenly popped up in her mind. She must be thinking too much. In the middle of the banquet, Jean Wan went to the champagne tower alone to pick up a glass of champagne and looked back at the people who were slowly dancing on the dance floor because of the music in the hall. She picked up another glass of champagne and planned to bring one for Xiao Li, who had no wine in his hand. However, as soon as she turned around with 2 glasses of champagne in her hand, the lights on the cruise ship suddenly flickered and finally became bright and dark, and from time to time there was a sizzling sound as if there was an electric short circuit. Then, the security guards on the scene sensed that something was wrong. Just as they were about to call everyone to stop walking back and forth, the lights in the banquet hall suddenly went out completely, and the surroundings became dark. Even if there was no danger and it might just be a problem with the lighting, there were still a lot of ladies and men who didn't know how to keep a low profile and were afraid of death, screaming in fear. A group of people fumbled around in the dark, looking for the direction of the exit. The voices of the security guards who were guiding the exit were drowned out by the screams. From time to time, someone raised the flashlight on his cell phone and shone it around, making it even more difficult to see clearly in the darkness. Jean-Wan hurriedly put down the glass and was about to follow the crowd out, but someone rushed too fast behind her. She couldn't see anything in front of her in the dark, but there should be more than one person. Those people suddenly bumped into a champagne tower 2 or 3 meters high, piled up of countless champagne glasses. Countless goblets fell, and in an instant, all the glasses smashed down on Jean-Wan, who was standing closest to the champagne tower. There was a crash and the sound of glasses falling to the ground. Soaked by the wine, Jean-Wan was about to dodge to the side to avoid being hurt more, but someone next to her bumped into her again. She was wearing high heels, and the ground under her feet was full of wine and glass fragments. It was slippery and she couldn't stand firm. As soon as she was bumped, she suddenly fell to the ground. Hiss! She sucked in a breath of cold air in pain. At the moment when her arms and calves were pierced by the glass fragments of various glasses on the ground, Jean-Wan wondered if she would be trampled to death by the panicked footsteps of a group of people, but the lights came back on at this moment. At the moment when the lights suddenly came on, everyone was stunned and didn't know whether it was just a temporary blackout or a cruise ship scare like in the movies, when Xiao Lui suddenly passed through the crowd and was about to rescue Jean-Wan before she was seen by others. Unexpectedly, someone was one step ahead of him, pushed through the crowd, wrapped a suit jacket around her soaked body, and then decisively picked up the injured Jean-Wan by the waist. With a stern and cold face, he told the people around to get lost and carried Jean-Wan out quickly. When the group of people came to their senses, they only saw MN Group CEO G, who was dripping wet and in a sorry state, wrapped in a black men's suit, almost covering half of her body. They couldn't see her face at this time, only her white and slender arms and calves were covered in blood. Only then did someone notice that even the high champagne tower had collapsed. There were glass fragments of wine glasses all over the ground, and there was a lot of blood on the ground. It seemed that CEO G had just fallen there and happened to fall directly on the glass fragments on the ground. It seemed that she was seriously injured. There were even people who recovered from their momentary panic and said in astonishment, "Am I seeing things?" The person who carried CEO G out just now was CEO Mo. The scene was still in a mess. Mr. Xiao Xinjuan suddenly came over quickly. Seeing the blood on the ground, he turned to look outside and said coldly, "Why is there so much blood? Send someone to have a look. If there's anything you need, send someone to help immediately. I hope this child is not seriously injured. She's such a good girl." The security guards kept explaining to the crowd that just now, there was a problem with the power lines because of the voltage instability on the cruise, but the power was restored in 2 minutes. They didn't expect that such a thing would happen in just 2 minutes. Mr. Xiao Xinjuan suddenly glared at Xiao Lui. "I asked you to take care of her, but why did you take care of her under the champagne tower?" With that, he turned around and ordered, "Ask someone to get the surveillance video of the power outage for 2 minutes. Isn't there a night vision camera here? I'd like to see who pushed him down when he was fine." At the back of the crowd, Xing Yihan suddenly looked at Ji Mengran beside him. Ji Mengran was secretly pleased to see that Jean-Wan was injured. Suddenly being stared at by Xing Yihan, she said, "It wasn't me. I was standing with you just now." When everyone was running around, it's normal for someone to bump into the champagne tower and then someone else. How could I have predicted the power outage? How could I control the power lines on the cruise? It's Jin Wan's bad luck. It has nothing to do with me. Xing Yihan glanced at her coldly again before retracting his gaze. He then glanced at the furious chairman of Ling Xiao Group. Ji Mengran said again, "Don't you think Mr. Xiao cares about Jin Wan very much? Do you think she's having an affair with Mr. Xiao? After all, everyone secretly says that she slept all the way to the company." Xing Yihan pulled his arm out of Ji Mingran's hand in annoyance and said coldly, "Shut up. Didn't you spread this rumor first?" Chapter 478. Jin Wan only hurt her left little arm and left calf. She didn't mind being drenched in champagne or having wine glasses poured on her, but her arms were stabbed by the glass shards when she fell to the ground. She didn't know how deep the wounds were, but now her arms and legs were hurting from time to time. Even though she now knew who had carried her out of the banquet hall, she couldn't refuse or show off. She really needed to go to the hospital immediately. If there was a deep wound soaked in champagne and bacteria on the ground, it would be easy for her to get infected. But she really didn't expect that Imo Jingshan, who was so far away from her and the banquet hall was so big, could accurately find her position in the darkness and rush of people and suddenly come to her side in just 2 minutes. The main thing was that it was so dark that she couldn't even see the person standing closest to her, let alone walk in the exact direction in the crowd. Jin Wan was held by the man the whole time. He didn't speak, nor did she, but she could feel from his tight embrace that he carried her so quickly to the parking lot of the cruise ship as effortlessly as before. She also weighed 90 kilograms, but every time, this man seemed to be holding a ball of cotton. Was she so light? When they arrived at the nearest hospital to Binhai Bay Road, Mo Jingshan sent her to the trauma department to disinfect and bandage her wounds. Sitting in the consulting room, a middle-aged female doctor took her arm and said while disinfecting it, "Girls nowadays look delicate and tender, but they are obviously more resistant to damage than older people like us. How can you be so calm after being stabbed by glass shards? Doesn't it hurt? Look, there are still some glass shards in the wound." Jin Wan looked at her arm. After wiping away the blood, she saw that there were only some small scratches and 2 deeper wounds that bled more. Although it was painful, she had been holding it in. However, after the doctor clicked his tongue and said a few words, she only felt the pain increase. She didn't speak. Seeing that the doctor was still nagging, she resisted the urge to roll her eyes and said, "Doctor, please hurry up. Hey, you're so hurt, but you still want me to hurry up? Don't I have to disinfect them one by one? The wound on your leg hasn't been treated yet. Why are you in such a hurry? Was that your boyfriend or your husband? I heard that when he carried you out of the car in front of the hospital, he didn't even lock the car and directly sent you in. He must be very distressed that you're injured like this, right? Be careful in the future. Don't go to parties or parties. Stay away from these dangerous things. Jin Wan, anti-doctor, you really know how to nag. But your boyfriend is really handsome. I've never seen a young man as good-looking as him in so many years in the hospital. Miss, you're also very good-looking. You two are a good match, doctor, as soon as possible, okay?" Jin Wan tried to maintain a smile. The doctor clicked his tongue again, put her arm down, then lifted her skirt, put her leg on the bed in the consulting room, and continued to treat the wound on her leg. At this moment, the door to the consultation room opened. Mo Jingshan brought in a black men's shirt and placed it by the bed. It was obvious that the shirt belonged to him. For him to be able to fetch it so quickly, he must have some spare clothes in his car. After disinfecting the wound, change the wet clothes on your body. I've asked someone to buy clothes for you. The seaside is far from the city, so you may have to wait for a while. Wear this first. Jean Wan took a look at him and wanted to say thank you, but when she saw the man's cold eyes, it was clear that anything she said could ignite a fire, so she thought for a while and didn't say anything. However, when the doctor took out a glass fragment deep into the flesh above her knee, she couldn't help but let out a hiss of pain. Mo Jingshan walked over. His words were not to comfort her or to ask the doctor to be gentle. Instead, he glanced at the wound on her leg and said mildly, "It's just a superficial wound, yet it hurts so much. Just now, it was only the champagne tower that fell. If it was the ceiling of the banquet hall that weighs tens of kilograms, would you still be standing there foolishly?" Jean Wan didn't raise her eyes. "I was wearing high-heeled shoes, and the ground was slippery and wet. I couldn't stand still at all. Do you think I didn't want to hide? And people were running around in a hurry, and I couldn't move at all, okay? Then you don't have to wear these high-heeled shoes anymore." "How can I not wear them? I'm not a rich lady in a big family. Every day in the company and on various occasions, if I wear flat shoes with a dress, or wear flat shoes with my usual business attire, it will be too inappropriate." At this time, the middle-aged female doctor was disinfecting the wound where she had just taken out the glass fragment. Jean Wan trembled in pain and her face turned pale. Mo Jingshan still didn't have any intention of comforting her. He said calmly, "Disinfect her wound a few more times and let it hurt a little longer." Jean Wan. The man threw the shirt on the bedside to her hand and said coldly, "If it doesn't hurt, you won't remember." "All right." The middle-aged female doctor readily agreed and then pressed the sterilized cotton on Jean Wan's knee again. Jean Wan trembled in pain and tried hard not to scream. With a pale face, she raised her eyes and glared at the man who was standing by the bed and watching calmly, scolding angrily, "CEO, it's improper for men and women to touch each other. My skirt has been lifted up, and my legs are lying on the bed. If you're a gentleman, shouldn't you turn around and leave now?" The man glanced at her indifferently. "You've slept with me countless times. Why are you afraid to see my leg?" Jean Wan. At this time, the middle-aged female doctor said to Jean Wan with sterilized cotton and medical tweezers in her hand, "Alas, don't flirt with me. I know you two love each other. I lost my husband when I was young and have been alone for so many years. I'm most afraid to see young people who love each other." Jean Wan sneered and didn't go to see the doctor but continued to look at Mo Jingshan coldly and said in a very cold tone, "Doctor, please don't mind me. I also lost my husband when I was young." The middle-aged female doctor's hand trembled. She looked at Jean Wan in surprise and then turned to look at Mo Jingshan in astonishment. "Oh, an aunt of my age may not understand you young people. Bear with it. The wound here will still hurt a little. I'll try to be gentle." Chapter 479. After the wound was cleaned, the doctor personally helped Jean Wan to the bathroom next door to wipe the alcohol off her body, helped her change her clothes, and asked someone to borrow a hairdryer from the VIP ward upstairs for Jean Wan to dry her hair. When Jean Wan came out in the black shirt, the doctor covered her mouth and said with a smile as she helped her into the consulting room, "When I watched TV series, I often saw that the heroine looked very beautiful in a man's shirt. I didn't expect that there was such a beautiful girl like you in reality. This shirt looks so beautiful on you. Hey, is that man really not your boyfriend? I said I lost my husband early. How could any man dare to marry me? Boyfriend? Not to mention, I've been single for more than 3 years, Jean Wan said casually. The doctor helped her sit down on the bed and checked her wound. Girl, when did you get married? You don't look old now. 20. Jean Wan smiled. Now I'm 24. Oh, your husband has been dead for 3 years, hasn't he? That's right. It's been 3 years. Jinwan's voice was calm and not guilty at all. The doctor hesitated and turned to look at the man who had been waiting for them in the consulting room. Mo Jingshan stood in front of the consulting room, looking out of the window. Hearing their conversation, he did not look back. The doctor coughed and said, "That's a pity. You're still so young. It's time to get over the pain of the past. You've done your best to guard your ex-husband for 3 years. It's time to consider finding a new man to fall in love with and marry. People can't be immersed in pain all their lives." Jinwan nodded solemnly. Yes, it's time to find a new man to fall in love with and marry. The man in front of the window turned back. Are you clean? Jinwan ignored him, and the doctor said with a smile, "She's clean, and her hair has been blow-dried. It's just that she didn't wash thoroughly enough in the hospital. She still smells of alcohol. I think she'll have to take a good bath when she goes back." Mo Jingshan came over and saw that Jinwan was wearing his shirt, which was just long enough to cover her thighs. As long as she walked normally, nothing else would be exposed. The sleeves of her shirt were rolled up high, and her arms and calves were wrapped in white gauze. Other than that, Jinwan did not appear to be injured anywhere else. She was in good condition. Do I need to go to the hospital to change my dressing? There's no need. Her injury isn't particularly serious. After disinfecting and applying medicine, try to get someone to help her bathe in the next few days. Don't let the wound get wet. She'll be fine in 2 days. It's okay. These are all very simple superficial wounds. Just be careful not to leave a scar. Otherwise, such a beautiful girl with such good skin won't look good if there's a scar. Mo Jingshan didn't listen to the doctor's nagging anymore. He withdrew his gaze and raised his hand to hold Jinwan's uninjured arm to support her, asking, "Can you walk?" Right now, Jinwan was wearing a pair of flat slippers that the doctor had given her. "I can walk," Jinwan said as she tried to pull her hand out of his. Mo Jingshan acted as if he did not see or feel the struggle in her hands and directly supported her to walk out. Under the doctor's eager and enthusiastic gaze, Jinwan didn't say anything. After walking out of the consulting room, she pulled her hand back. "Thank you, CEO Mo. I don't have to trouble you. I can walk by myself." Mo Jingshan just glanced at her indifferently and didn't let go of her. He helped her into the elevator and still didn't let go of her. Seeing him holding her arm with one hand and pressing the elevator button with the other, Jinwan took advantage of the fact that there was no one else in the elevator and shook her hand. "Let go." Mo Jingshan looked back at her coldly. "If you don't want to be carried out by me, behave yourself." "CEO Mo, thank you very much for your help today. If you hadn't helped me put on my clothes in time in the banquet hall, I would have been seen by others. Thank you for sending me to the hospital, but I'm fine now. The doctor said it's just a superficial wound. I don't need to be held, let alone held, okay?" Mo Jingshan nodded and said, "CEO Mo, I'm very grateful to you for helping me today. I don't need you to help me or hold me, okay?" The elevator stopped on the first floor. Mo Jingshan didn't respond but took her out. Jinwan was wearing slippers, but they didn't belong to her, so she couldn't walk very well. She stumbled a little and followed him out. Because there were too many doctors, patients, and family members on the first floor, she tried hard not to make a sound, lest she attracted others' attention. She was taken to his car parked outside the main entrance of the hospital. Jinwan looked at the black ghost in front of her, which was the same as it was 3 years ago, remembered the scene when he carried her out of the car, and immediately took a step back. Mo Jingshan glanced at her indifferently because of her movement. "I can take a taxi back." I don't need to trouble CEOMO to take such a small wound. Jean-Wan didn't look at him and still tried to withdraw her hand. Jean-Wan, you should know my temper. Get in the car, okay? The man's hand had turned to hold her wrist, and he didn't intend to let go. He didn't hold her tightly and wouldn't hurt her, but she just couldn't pull her hand out. Jean-Wan's eyes turned cold for a moment. I don't understand. Mo Jingshan looked at her and froze for a moment. Then he didn't say more, opened the car door, and signaled her to get in the car and stop dawdling. Jean-Wan didn't want to have anything to do with him. She could understand their previous encounters as inevitable in the mall. Today, when he carried her out in public, her mind was a little blank and she couldn't refuse him. In that situation, she wouldn't be so ungrateful. Jean-Wan didn't know what was good for her. But now she seemed to have no reason to get in his car. She was silent for a moment and then said, when I saw that Bugatti last time, I thought you had changed to a new car. After all, it's been several years. I didn't expect that this ghost is still here. Mo Jingshan knew that she was changing the subject and attention, so he didn't answer her. Seeing that she really didn't intend to get in the car, he pressed her in with the strength of his hand. As soon as Jean-Wan sat in the passenger seat and was about to get out, the man pressed her seatbelt that had just been pulled halfway, lowered his head, looked at her cold and resistant face, and said almost commandingly, "Sit tight." The author's words, 2 days in a row, I really did it. Tears streamed down my old face. In fact, there were a lot of foreshadowing in the updates these 2 days. I hope you don't just look at the places where the male lead appears. Some foreshadowing should be read. Today, I took some time to carefully read the recent readers' comments. And, don't worry, I'll write about the plot you want to see in the future. Chapter 480. Jean-Wan had to raise her face to look at him because of his oppressive posture, and because he could kiss her if he lowered his head a little, she froze and didn't move. This distance was too close, so close that she could clearly feel the man's slightly hot breath brushing against her cheek. Then she heard a low, crisp sound, which was the sound of him fastening the seatbelt in front of her. She stepped back a little, leaned against the seat, and kept a distance from him. It was not a compromise, but Mo Jingshan clearly didn't intend to give her a chance to leave alone. No matter how she resisted now, it would be useless, and the result would be the same. He didn't do anything to her. When he saw her sit down obediently, he got up and closed the door. Sitting in the car, Jean-Wan saw that her bag was still in his car. When he carried her out of the banquet hall, she remembered that he had taken her bag with him. When she got out of the car, she forgot to take her bag. If she had really planned to take a taxi back alone, she wouldn't have brought her cell phone with her, let alone the fare. She really couldn't go back. At the thought of the embarrassment of having no money or cell phone if she had successfully escaped, Jean-Wan picked up the bag and put it on her lap, which could cover the length of the shirt that barely covered her thighs. If she sat here without a bag to cover her, too much would be exposed. Mo Jingshan opened the door of the driver's seat. After getting in the car, he glanced at Jean-Wan, who had been sitting next to him with a straight face. The clothes I bought for you are in the back seat. Do you want to change now or take them back? There's no need to change now. I'll take them back. Thank you, CEO for buying them for me, Jean-Wan said flatly. The man didn't say anything more and drove the car away from the hospital. Half an hour later, Jean-Wan saw that he was driving in the direction of the apartment where she lived now, so she said, if it's convenient, CEO please send me back to the company. I don't plan to go home tonight. You want to go back to the company dressed like this? It's so late, and there's no one in the company. Besides, aren't there new clothes in the back? I'll just wear them outside. Jean-Wan said flatly, it's already so late. If I go home now, it won't be convenient for me to take a shower or do anything. There's a 7 a.m. meeting tomorrow morning, and it's a meeting that I have to attend. You're the CEO of the company, so you should know how important this kind of meeting is. I only have some minor injuries. If I stay at home to rest, it'll be too late. With that, Jinwan said indifferently, even if I go home in this state, I won't be able to get to the company before 7 o'clock tomorrow. I might as well go back to the company now. Anyway, there's a break room in my office. I'll take a shower, change my clothes, and have a good night's rest. I don't have to get up early tomorrow morning and go to the meeting without walking too far. I'm not someone who can easily ask for leave. It's better not to be absent from important meetings. What do you think, CEO Mo? The man didn't speak but turned the car onto another road, the road leading to the MN Group in the west of the city. At the gate of the MN Group's office building, Mo Jingshan saw that several floors of the building were still lit up, and the security guards were also guarding outside the door. It was quite safe. He handed her the clothes in the back seat of the car. Put them on. Don't go in until you're dressed. Jinwan didn't reply. After taking the clothes, she picked up a long, loose dress and put it on. When Mo Jingshan saw that the dress was over her knees, he opened the central lock in the car and allowed her to get out. The moment Jinwan opened the door, she looked back at him. Thank you, CEO Mo. Be careful when you drive at night. Don't get killed in another car accident. Mo Jingshan glanced at her disapprovingly. I haven't seen you for years, but your mouth has become more and more vicious. Jinwan gave him a bright smile, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Haven't I been like this before? Do you think I haven't taken off my mask of gentleness and understanding? With that, she didn't say anything more. She got out of the car, took her bag, and walked into the company without looking back. After entering the company, the security guards were surprised that CEO G would come to the company so late. When they saw the gauze on her arms and legs, two security guards hurriedly ran out to ask, CEO G, what happened? Why are you injured? It's nothing. I accidentally fell down at a banquet. It's just a skin injury. I'll be fine in 2 days. Jinwan walked to the elevator and didn't explain much. Then why did you come to the company? I was too lazy to go home. I'm going to sleep in the office break room for the night. Before entering the elevator, she thought for a while. Order takeout for me, noodles or rice noodles. The security guards nodded blankly. When Jinwan entered the elevator and the elevator door closed, the security guards hurried to find the number for takeout. When she reached the top floor of the company, Jinwan turned on the main control light on this floor, and the darkness instantly turned bright. She walked into the office, took off her slippers, threw her bag on the sofa in the office barefoot, and hurriedly pushed the door into the break room. She took off all her clothes, went in, and carefully wiped the rest of her body with a towel except for her wounds. Then she washed her hair separately. After making sure the smell of alcohol was gone, she came out and found comfortable clothes in the wardrobe to change into. After finishing all this, the security guards brought over the takeout he had just ordered for her. It was a bowl of beef noodles. Jinwan took it in and began to eat. She enjoyed it very much, as if nothing had happened today. It wasn't until the cell phone in her bag vibrated that she took out her cell phone and saw that there were many missed calls, several of which were from Xiaolui. She picked up the phone, and there came a man's voice. How's the wound? Did you go to the hospital to bandage it? You took so long to answer the phone. If you didn't answer it, I'm afraid I would have thought you were taken away by your ex-husband and locked up. Jinwan. CEO Zhao's imagination is too good. How many people in this world are as perverted as you who always like to lock people up? The man on the other side of the phone sneered coldly. Do you think I'm locking you up? You have good food and drinks, and you don't lack anything. You even have someone to serve you. Even when you go swimming, someone will hand you a bath towel. It's more comfortable than a vacation. Most people can only beg for such treatment. Then I should thank CEO Xiao for letting me spend a week happily being kidnapped. Chapter 481. Xiao Li snorted and didn't continue this topic but said, "My father flew into a rage when you fell and injured yourself at the birthday party today. I haven't seen him so angry for many years. Did Imo Jingshan take you to the hospital to bandage your wounds?" "Yes, they've been disinfected and applied medicine. It's no big deal." Jin Wan's voice was cold and indifferent. "Thank you for your concern, CEO Xiao. Speaking of concern, Miss Ji, if you have time, you can come to the Xiao family." "CEO Xiao, I'm actually not the type to get to the bottom of things, but I really don't know you and old Mr. Xiao very well. Your sudden concern makes me very nervous. Today, you invited all the famous people in High City, and I've also received an invitation. That's still acceptable, but inviting me to see old Mr. Xiao is already inappropriate. Now, you're inviting me to your home for a meal. Don't tell me you really want me to be your stepmother." Xiao Lui sneered. "You're quite thoughtful. Otherwise, what else can I think? Is it just because your father likes me so much and wants to take me in as his goddaughter? I don't think so. After all, we haven't even met before. How can he be so familiar with me? Your Ling Xiao group is a big business, and there are many people who want to be relatives with your family. What do you think I should think when someone I've never met suddenly shows such great interest in me?" Xiao Li didn't say much but said, "All right, Miss Ji, go to bed early." Jin Wan casually responded. Without waiting for the other party to hang up, she hung up and tossed her phone onto the bed. She then lowered her eyes to look at the darkened screen of her phone, thinking about what happened at the banquet today. The way Mr. Xiao looked at her at that time, Jin Wan pondered for a moment and suddenly wanted to call Ji Hongwen, but she glanced at the time and gave up. It was so late. Her father must have gone to bed. The government's project to rebuild the stadium had begun. All the plans and personnel, including financial and material resources, were ready, and they just needed to finalize the date of construction. Jin Wan didn't go to the government recently. In fact, as long as the higher-ups didn't ask her to be there in person, she basically wouldn't show up. Although this was a very important project issued by the government, she would try to let others go as much as possible. Xiao Ba brought a group of people to inspect the construction site of the old stadium. They were gone for several hours and only returned in the afternoon, exhausted and sweaty. He handed her a camera filled with electronic photos. Jin Wan inserted the camera's memory card into the computer and checked the photos they had taken. After Xiao Ba went back to her office to take a shower and rest for half an hour, she came back to say, "By the way, boss, I met the leaders of the city at the construction site today. They said that since the project has been finalized by the province and the city, we don't have to go to the city for the stadium for the time being. We can choose a place to discuss the stadium with the person in charge of the construction bureau and other partners." Then the leaders of the construction bureau said that their bureau was too far from the stadium and planned to move all the meetings about the stadium project to Shine Group. "That is to say, boss, if you continue to follow the progress of this project, you should go to the office building of Shine Group with the people of the construction bureau in the future." Jin Wan stared at the photos on the screen without any pause and said calmly, "I see." Seeing that Jin Wan didn't show any dissatisfaction, Xiao Ba stared at her expression for a while and didn't see any uneasiness on her face. It made sense. This was what the government and the construction bureau said, and the matter had been settled. Even if Jean Wan had any dissatisfaction or objection, she could only vent her anger in her own company, and there was no change in the result. Well, boss, the construction bureau said that there will be another meeting this Friday. Shall we go to Shine at the appointed time? Okay. Jean Wan still looked at the computer screen. Xiao Ba didn't dare to disturb her anymore and walked away lightly. It wasn't until the office door was closed that Jean Wan looked at the photos of the construction site on the screen, raised her hands to her temples, and let out a long breath as she rubbed and massaged her temples. The headquarters of the Shine Group was the former MO Group. It was still in the original location, but it was upgraded and rebuilt. It used to be very tall, and now it was even taller. Moreover, it was a building that incorporated many modern high-tech designs. If the people from the construction bureau wanted to take the opportunity to visit the Shine Group, they could just say that it was their own reason. Why did they have to involve this project meeting and let everyone follow them to visit the Shine Group's building? She had long heard that the person in charge of the construction bureau this time was a very jumpy person. Sure enough, this kind of thing could be done in the construction bureau. Why the hell did they put it in Shine Group? A good stadium project became a good opportunity for various cooperative agencies and companies to take turns to cling to Shine Group. She really should thank the person in charge of the construction bureau for his good intentions. 2 days later, Friday. Office building of Shine Group in High City. Jean Wan got out of the car and looked at the magnificent and towering building in front of her. It had been a long time since she came here. After returning to China, she rarely passed by this main street and this square, so she had never seen the difference between today's Shine Group and the MO Corporation 3 years ago. Now it seemed that although it was still in the same place, the difference was really big. Xiao Ba followed Jean Wan out of the car. At this time, Deputy Director Chin, the person in charge of the construction bureau, also arrived. When he saw Jean Wan, he came over and shook hands with her with a smile. CEOG is really punctual. I heard that several roads in MN Group are being repaired, causing serious traffic jams in the West City district, but you also arrived so early. Jean Wan nodded at him, raised her hand symbolically, and shook hands with him, and then took her hand back. Fortunately, the traffic jam was not very serious just now. This is the first time I come to Shine Group for a meeting. How dare I be late? Oh. Is this also the first time CEOG has come to Shine? Deputy Director Chin smiled. Jean Wan didn't look at him again, nor did she say much. She just looked inside. Let's go in. Okay. Deputy Director Chin said and asked other people to follow him. Chapter 482. After a few polite greetings, they went straight into the elevator. Deputy Director Chin was really curious about Shine Group. Even a slightly more high-tech elevator was a novelty to him, and he kept asking Shenmu about this and that. Fortunately, Shenmu was gentle and patient, and he was better at dealing with people than many ordinary assistants. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been trusted and put in an important position by Mo Jingshan's side for so many years. After talking for a while, they arrived at the floor of the conference room. Deputy Director Chin walked in front, and Jean Wan walked unhurriedly behind him. When passing by an office, she noticed that there were many employees she had never seen before, but there were also some old employees she had passed here 3 years ago. She turned her face away, lest it arouse others' curiosity and gossip. At this time, Shenmu took the time to come back. Standing by Jean Wan's side, he noticed that Jean Wan was wearing very casual close-fitting jeans and a long-sleeved translucent white chiffon shirt. Her shoulder-length hair was slightly curled inwards in a very professional way, and she looked so calm as if this was not the old site of Mo Corporation but a place where she came for a temporary meeting. Won't it be hot to wear trousers in this weather? Seeing that Jinwan didn't mean to take the initiative to talk to him, Shenmu walked beside her and asked with a low smile. Jinwan took a look at him and said flatly, "Special Assistant Shin, it seems that your observation skills are a bit off. Do I have to explain to you what I wear?" The corner of Shenmu's mouth twitched. "I'm just concerned about you. Special Assistant Shin, don't worry about me too much. It's my first time to come to your company. It's more appropriate for you to introduce the environment of this company to me." Hearing the word first time, Shenmu understood what Jinwan meant. It seemed that she really didn't want to revisit this old place. "Special Assistant Shin, our boss suffered some minor injuries on his arms and legs not long ago. Although he's fine now, there are still some red marks, which don't look good if they're exposed. After the marks disappear in a few days, he can wear clothes normally," Xiao Ba whispered beside him. Shenmu had just nodded to Xiao Ba when Jinwan reached back and took the documents from Xiao Ba's arms, saying mildly, "You guys talk outside. I'll go in for the meeting." Knowing that Jinwan was blaming her for talking too much, Xiao Ba hurriedly followed Jinwan's footsteps with an uneasy expression and followed her into the conference room. When everyone had taken their seats, Jinwan went in and greeted them politely. She was about to sit down when the sound of a man's footsteps suddenly rang outside the conference room, which was particularly clear in the large space of the conference room that had suddenly fallen silent. Jinwan turned around and saw that Imo Jingshan had already entered. He was a handsome man. His clear facial features perfectly matched the cold face he had when he had carried her into the hospital that day. He was wearing a pair of black trousers on the lower half of his body and a pure white shirt. The buttons on the shirt were all buttoned up tightly, giving off the aura of a cold and noble elite. He was not like his usual self with a few buttons unbuttoned outside the company, looking half sexy and half abstinent. Although the meeting was arranged by the construction bureau, it was held in Shine Group after all. With a smile on his lips, he glanced at everyone and said in a very magnetic voice, "Deputy Director Chin, how did you think of holding the meeting in Shine Group? I didn't have time to greet you just now. Please forgive me for my poor hospitality." "Not at all. CEO Mo is very busy. It's very kind of you to take the time to hold a meeting with us. We chose this place because it is closer to the stadium of our project site, and Shine Group has a large space and more spare conference rooms. It's more convenient for you to arrange a conference room for us." Deputy Director Chin got up and stepped forward to shake hands with him. After another round of pleasantries, Mo Jingshan withdrew his hand and went straight to the meeting. Jinwan didn't move, but Deputy Director Chin hurriedly gave up the seat in front of him and invited Mo Jingshan to take a seat several times. Then Deputy Director Chin asked everyone to move back and finally vacate the seat next to Jinwan. He sat down on Jinwan's right side. "It's closer here, and it's more convenient for us to talk," Deputy Director Chin said as he moved closer to Jinwan. Jinwan smiled. When she turned her eyes, she saw that the man was sitting in the leather chair in front of the conference table. His slender legs wrapped in pressed black trousers were elegantly crossed, and his slender and well-defined fingers were holding the documents that his secretary had just handed to him. The huge high-definition screen in front of him had already shown the design drawings of all directions of the stadium. In order to make the screen clearer, the lights in the conference room were not turned on, and only the pictures on the blue screen kept rolling. In the blue light, the man's extremely handsome face was blurred by the light, but he looked unusually cold. Glancing at Jinwan, who was being tugged at by Deputy Director Chen's sleeve and talking in a low voice, Mo Jingshan's thin and cold lips curled up slightly, and he smiled coldly, but his voice was so low that no one could hear his emotions. "Deputy Director Chin, are you here for a meeting or just want to talk to CEO G alone?" Could it be that Deputy Director Chin has forgotten that all the agencies and partners are still sitting here? As soon as Mo Jingshan finished speaking, Deputy Director Chen's hand that had been tugging at Jean Wan's sleeve trembled, and he hurriedly let go of her. Jean Wan also withdrew her arm at the right time and calmly continued to look at the pictures on the big screen and the staff who were standing in front of them and analyzing the various project drawings of the stadium. Seeing that Deputy Director Chin didn't dare to continue to look at Jean Wan, nor did he dare to tug at her sleeve and talk to her in a low voice, Mo Jingshan threw the documents in his hand on the conference table with his slender fingers, signaling for the meeting to continue. Some of the people present had been invited to Mr. Zhao's birthday party a few days ago and had seen Mo Jingshan carrying the injured Jean Wan out. Some of them had seen Mo Jingshan, who had always kept a distance from women, teaching Jean Wan how to play darts when they went to the seaside resort some time ago. Some of them had noticed Mo Jingshan, who had always kept a distance from women, teaching Jean Wan how to play darts. Some of them had noticed Mo Jingshan and CEO G of MN Group, but no one dared to gossip about it. At this moment, seeing Mo Jingshan's cold attitude, they felt that the relationship between CEO G and CEO Mo was really not ordinary. The conference room was silent, and only the staff standing in front of the screen were talking. There were a lot of people in the conference room, so the air conditioning was turned on. Most of the people present were men in shirts, suits, and trousers. When they all felt a little cold, Jean Wan also felt cold. Just as she inadvertently touched her arm through the long-sleeved chiffon shirt, the man sitting at the head of the conference table didn't seem to look at her, but his voice suddenly rang coldly. Shenmu, go and turn up the temperature of the air conditioning. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.